The girl was so pitiful, she was even being used by her own family. She was Lunatia Hassel, the second daughter of the Hassel family. Her older brother shouted her name, forcing her out of bed. The eldest son, Solei, greeted her with his dazzling smile. He plopped down in the middle of the bed, saying he had an important exam today. He was about to qualify to become a knight, just as their father wished. Therefore, he began to plead with Lunatia to peer into the future for him. He only ever spoke to her when he needed something from her, just like now. Lunatia tried to explain how serious the consequences of doing so were. Even so, he kept demanding that she just tell him the answers. The girl was about to say she wasn't feeling well, but was interrupted by her older sister. Rosalind and Cynthia appeared together and immediately started sweet-talking their younger sister. Rosalind took a step closer, accusing Lunatia of still lazing in bed. She added that she had come to wake her up so their dad wouldn't get angry. Lunatia tried to explain why, but was immediately cut off. Rosalind claimed that cleaning up her sister's messes was a common occurrence. These words instantly enraged the exhausted girl. Her sister immediately started pestering her, demanding she foresee her future as payback. She held out her hand and started talking about her big business deal tomorrow. She wanted to know if the mine she planned to buy would be profitable. She smiled, going on about how everything she did was for the family. Lunatia tried to argue again, explaining that it would drain her energy. Cynthia looked worried, thinking Luna was sick. She asked for a prediction of her own future in 3 days, instead of Rosalind's. She was interested in trivial things, like what dresses the ladies-in-waiting would wear at the ball. She wanted to show up in a dress that would truly stand out. After that, they all started bickering over whose future should be foreseen. Each of them presented reasons they considered critically important. In the end, they all stared at their sister like a pack of vultures. In every generation of the Hassel family, a child is born with the ability to foresee the future. The one with this ability has a large birthmark on their chest. This proves that the ability is the family's trump card, but even they shouldn't overuse it. Lunatia abused it, which is why she's blind in her right eye. Her older sister Rosalind was the family's first golden child. Shortly after, Lunatia was born, followed by the long-awaited son, Soleil. Although they were twins, their parents favored him more. They almost forgot Lunatia existed, leaving her to fend for herself. 5 years later, Cynthia was born, and everyone was captivated by her beauty. And so, they became a happy family, one she was not a part of. Compared to the beloved children of the Hassel family, she was just a shadow. They only remembered her after Lunatia's ability awakened, which had once made her ecstatic. Soon, their greed caused her body to start breaking down. One day, she overheard that a certain Marquis was looking for a bride. Everyone predicted that the lucky woman would live a life of luxury and be showered with love. These words gave Lunatia hope in Marquis Iltern. He was a rather stubborn war hero and strikingly handsome. His aide, Urin, jokingly announced that he had brought another letter. Iltern Knox immediately began to read the letter from a viscount's daughter. The man calmly told his aide to send a polite letter of refusal. Urin bluntly asked how long he planned to keep this up. They both knew he was covering for his prince friend, who was the one actually looking for a bride. He chuckled and suggested that instead of attracting all these young women, he might as well just get married himself. Lord Knox ignored the taunt and simply tossed the letter aside. Urin scrambled to pick up the paper and noticed something odd about a new letter. It seemed the awkward comment had indeed caught the man's attention. Urin guessed the letter was written by the young lady herself, not her father. All of this indicated that the daughter of the Hassel family herself wanted to be his wife. Urin agreed, concluding that she was definitely very interested. Iltern Knox fell into thought, as if weighing the pros and cons. Finally, he stood up abruptly and ordered them not to reply to the girl. Urin sarcastically asked if he actually wanted to meet her in person. The man just put on his coat, shrugged, and said the woman might relieve his boredom. From that moment on, not a day went by when Lunatia didn't think about the letter. The man was known as the Moon Eater, and his reputation was extraordinary. Despite his fame, he had retired and built a mansion far from civilization. Due to his, let's say, dangerous behavior, rumors about him were constant. Some even said he could drive his enemies into very tragic situations. As soon as word got out that he was looking for a bride, letters from nobles came flooding in. Lunatia knew she had to make a strong impression on him, as she couldn't last much longer in her own home. It seemed the maid noticed the change in her mood and asked about it. Lunatia had no intention of confiding her inner troubles. The servants already knew that her fiancé would be coming today to finalize the details of their engagement. Suddenly, the girl remembered a huge problem. She had inherited her ancestors' memoirs and was responsible for continuing to write in them. The problem was little Soleil had dropped the damn book into a pond. Lunatia managed to salvage some entries, which warned of the risks of overuse. The book said that one could eventually lose all 5 senses. And it was true, because now one of her eyes was already blind. She remembered how much this new information had shocked her. She had a hard time accepting that she might be destroying herself. She glimpsed her own reflection, twisted in fear. Her face twisted in fear. Lunatia had never done this before, but now was the time. For the first time, she decided to look into her own future. The girl touched the mirror, asking it to show her the future she desired. The next moment, she felt everything around her being swallowed by absolute darkness. Suddenly, she realized she couldn't feel anything. Her body and mind were as if in a vacuum, the kind where life cannot exist. The memoirs recorded that a person who lost one sense would eventually lose all the others. After reading this, Lunatia decided to accept her fate and put the book aside. She wanted to live this 1 year completely as she wished, so she would have no regrets later. She was so lost in thought that she didn't even notice someone was nearby. The girl nearly jumped out of her skin when she felt someone grab her. Standing before her was Rondell Aladi, an Imperial Knight from the 2nd Division. Lunatia immediately chided him for sneaking up on her like that. Seeing her annoyed expression, the man guessed she was angry. He smirked and said he just wanted to see his future bride. Rondell also added that Soleil and Cynthia would be happy to see him too. At first, she thought this man was kind and understanding and could be a good friend. She had thought no one would ever ask her for anything again. Lunatia decided to be direct and asked if he needed help. She called it help, but all he wanted was a glimpse into his future. She saw once again that he didn't care about her feelings at all. His family was famous for producing legendary knights for generations. Even so, Rondell was not naturally gifted in swordsmanship. As her future husband, he constantly used her gift, which allowed him to rise through the ranks. She wanted to get rid of him, which was why she needed a new husband in the first place. Meanwhile, he was still constantly trying to pull strings to get what he wanted. Lunatia felt a wave of nausea and wanted to scream. She tried to argue, but the maid announced that a letter had arrived. The girl froze instantly, guessing it was a letter from that man. Her attitude shifted, and she told Rondell he could leave, just like that. He started to argue, but she coldly bid her fiancé farewell. Afterward, she completely forgot about him and sat down to write. She glanced at the letter and realized it was from the Moon Eater. That very night, the girl headed to his gloomy mansion. The Marquis had invited her for a private meeting, which greatly shocked the family. A little while ago, she had brought up the meeting to them at dinner. The man was stunned and asked if she knew what she was saying. He was shocked by his daughter's unusual determination. He slammed his fist on the table, reminding her how important the marriage alliance with the Aladi family was. Nicholas Hassel was furious with his daughter's decision. The girl struggled to remain calm and asked him to hear her out. She reached for her cup, but her hand was shaking so much she couldn't grasp it. Lunatia realized she had knocked over a knife, which fell to the floor with a clatter. Nicholas sighed, completely fed up, and called his daughter clumsy. He waved a hand as servant, telling her to replace the cutlery. The man's face darkened as he began to list all the things she had messed up. He added that it was her duty to help the family by foreseeing the future. She was disgusted that he only ever talked about this. His wife, Sanria, chimed in to support her husband's words. She mentioned Rosalind, who had started her own business and was providing for the family. Even Soleil was working desperately for the family, trying to become a high-ranking knight. She even mentioned Cynthia, who was carefully searching for a future husband. The old woman concluded that Lunatia should also do something for the family. She brought all this up just to refuse my request to break the engagement. Rosalind immediately asked if I had a falling out with Rondell. Cynthia chimed in that we shouldn't call off the engagement, and they mentioned how Rondell had supported me during my difficult times. All their words confirmed for Lunatia that they didn't care at all about what I wanted. In the end, Nicholas stood up and said he needed to consider my proposal. Afterward, all the family members left the room, leaving her alone. Lunatia wondered if she should tell them about the Moon Eater's invitation. She knew very well that she couldn't back down now. She had to take advantage of the fact that she had caught the attention of such a figure. After a while, they finally arrived at the warrior's castle. The girl was delighted and tried to get out of the carriage, but twisted her ankle. She quickly grabbed the carriage door to keep from falling flat on her face. She was once again reminded of how inconvenient it was to live with only one eye. The coachman tried to explain how dangerous the area was. He suggested that if she was still so scared, she shouldn't go any further. She suddenly had a feeling as if she was born to be here at this very moment. She bid the driver farewell, thanking him for the ride. Lunatia smiled, wishing him a future full of joy and good fortune. Meanwhile, the Marquis was already looking forward to their meeting. Yurin asked, "Does my being here really make you that happy?" He was right, and just a few minutes later, she was standing before him. Lunatia politely greeted Marquis Ilturn. She walked forward, not even noticing a table in her path. As a result, she tripped and nearly took a huge tumble. She smiled sheepishly and said, "Oops, it seems I wasn't watching where I was going." The man immediately noticed that her right eye was blind. He stared intently at the girl, as if needing to be absolutely sure. Lunatia felt she should get straight to the point. She looked him in the eye and, very seriously, asked him to marry her. The proposal was so unexpected it made him freeze on the spot. The man stated coldly that he had no plans to marry anytime soon. He also said he spread the rumor to avoid losing his position as head of the family too soon. Hearing this, she guessed he didn't want to hand the family business over to his younger brother. She gently touched his hand as if to lure him in. The man didn't move as she took both his hands and raised them to her face. She finally gathered her courage and revealed her secret gift of foresight. Lunatia held his hands again, saying she only needed to touch a person. Just by doing so, she could see any point in their future. The man immediately wanted to know if the legend about her family was true. Lunatia reiterated that she was offering him a marriage of convenience in exchange for daily forecasts. She added that he had the right to her in things when she became a burden. The girl spoke of it so casually it was almost disturbing. The Marquis said she was unusually calm for someone proposing a deal with such an ultimate consequence. He was surprised at how eager she was to become part of his family. The girl simply answered him with a silent smile and a calm nod. The man sighed and said she was the most interesting candidate he had ever met. His response immediately lifted the desperate girl's spirits. He suddenly became serious and told her she needed to prove it on the spot. Lunaria responded to his request, saying she would do as he said. Then she held the warrior's hands tighter and prepared herself. The girl froze, diving into the timeline. She immediately felt fragments of events rushing towards her. Finally, she opened her eyes and felt her body go limp. The girl collapsed into the Duke's arms, as if the foresight had drained all her energy. She regained her senses and explained that it was very draining. The girl touched his chest and said a maid would be bringing his tea soon. She pointed to the carpet and said she would probably barge in without asking and then trip. Lunatia added that his aide would catch her, so it would be fine. She said that if he fixed the carpet, the future would change. No sooner had she spoken than the maid burst into the room. She tried to walk forward with the tray, but her foot got caught on the carpet. As a result, she fell flat on her face. The tray went flying, but she was unharmed. Seeing that everything went as planned, Lunatia gave a sheepish smile. She declared meaningfully that this future was set in stone. Now all she had to do was eagerly watch the Marquis's reaction. It seemed everyone present was completely stunned. Finally, the man smirked and said he understood now. He didn't understand how it all worked, but he said he believed her. He told the maid to come back later, saying he didn't need tea anymore. He waited until they were alone and declared her talent to be very valuable. The Marquis suddenly remembered she had siblings. In addition to that, he also knew that Lunatia already had a fiancé. He asked if this information was true, catching her off guard. Yurin immediately recalled that the Hassel family had betrothed their second daughter to the son of the Alati family. The girl froze when he mentioned the real reason for the engagement. Finally, she admitted it was true, but that she had already requested a divorce. The Marquis fell into thought, trying to figure out the reason behind her sudden move. Lunatia reached out her hand, asking him to help her with this decision. She stated firmly that she simply did not want to be Rondel's partner. It seemed the two men were quite shocked by her unexpected words. The Marquis even let out a small laugh at the girl's simple reason. He asked if she really came to him just for that. Lunatia froze when he said she had developed a strong aversion to the son of Count Alati. The girl smiled back at him and said you could say that. She added that she might not get a second chance at a happy future. And for that very reason, she had sought out the gloomy, reclusive Marquis Knox. Her determination was clear in her eyes, as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. Finally, Knox said that out of respect, he would take her as his wife. Lunatia was overjoyed, saying it would be her honor to be with him. She bowed deeply, thanking him for his trust in her. The Marquis said he would pick her up at his estate in a few days. He suggested she stay at the castle for the night, and then left. The Marquis could see how much she didn't want to return to her own home. The mere mention of her family made her gloomy and sad. Before leaving, he told Urin to prepare the best room for the lady. The man protested, realizing all the responsibility was being pushed onto him again. He turned to the girl with a smile, calling Lunatia his little sweetheart. On the way to her room, she carefully analyzed everything that had just happened. She decided to keep the price she paid for her gift a secret. The girl found that the Marquis wasn't as bad as the rumors said. Still, she would have to return to her own home tomorrow. Growing up, the only thing she ever wanted was for someone to notice her. She blinked awake, barely remembering that she was already home. The girl remembered her father's face, twisted with rage. He had locked her in the cellar for leaving the house without permission. When Lunaria discovered her ability, she knew their affection was nothing but a sham. She had been ecstatic, thinking everyone would finally love her. Back then, she didn't know what it would lead to and recklessly exhausted her power. She wondered if Marquis Iltern would come for her, as he had promised. The girl remembered how he had told her not to be discouraged before they parted. She apologized when he said he could read her like a book. He looked her straight in the eye and said confidently that she was his wife now. The man told her to hold on until he showed up to meet her family. Flustered by how direct he was, the girl agreed again. She had no choice but to trust and wait for the Marquis. That night, his beautiful eyes had locked onto her with an intense gaze. She was surprised to find that she was almost happy to see those eyes. Even at the very end, one evening, the head of the family gathered everyone to announce some big news. It had been 5 whole days since he had put Lunatia under house arrest. She had barely touched the food the maids brought her. The man just said calmly that he wouldn't let her out until she apologized. Her sister wondered where Lunatia had spent the night. Rosalind guessed she had fled town and stayed at an inn. She also mentioned that she had a big business deal with some new partners coming up soon. Cynthia chimed in that she also needed a prediction. Before the ball, Sol couldn't wait any longer and got up to rush to Lunatia. He tried to storm out of the room, but ran into a surprised Randall. Like everyone else, he was here to see Lunatia. The head of the family immediately brightened up at the sight of her beloved fiancé. He opened his arms and begged him to forgive his foolish little daughter. Rondell admitted that he started to panic when he received her letter breaking off the engagement. He wanted to know how she was doing and to understand why she did it. He thought maybe he should apologize for not giving her enough attention. Nicholas immediately perked up, thinking that was exactly the reason. He began to suggest that they sit down and talk with his daughter. They all froze when they heard the surprised shouts of the servants. The servants tried to stop the strangers, saying they couldn't just barge in. The Marquis said, "Why are you telling me this?" He asked grimly, "Does no one here know who I am?" The man was holding a large bouquet of roses, while Urin was trying to figure out who he was. Everyone was completely stunned when they realized it was the war hero. While the others were still in shock, Nicholas decided to start shouting. He demanded to know how he dared to show up at the mansion so disrespectfully. The man told the Marquis to get out of this house at once. He rambled on until he finally realized who he was talking to. Nicholas didn't recognize his face. It was the crest that made him realize. He turned pale with fright and asked if he was really the Marquis. The rest of the family froze, waiting to see how things would unfold. The Marquis apologized for showing up at their home so unannounced. He introduced himself as Marquis Knox Iltern, the Moon Eater, and dropped a bombshell by saying he had come to ask for Miss Lenethia's hand in marriage. Nicholas flew into a rage upon hearing this announcement and tried to demand what nonsense he was spouting, but the Marquis held up a hand to stop stop him. Iltern clutched his chest, saying he had fallen in love with her daughter at first sight. Randall immediately shouted that it was absolutely impossible. He said Luna was already promised to him and would never be Knox's wife. Knox simply replied that he had already contacted Randall's father, who had agreed to dissolve the engagement. The words left Randall stunned into silence. The Marquis' aide interjected that they had already taken care of the legal matters. Count Alandi's letter stated that he would not stand in the way of their love. Randall couldn't believe his own father had yielded to Marquis Knox. As it turned out, a war hero had the right to interfere in the affairs of the Empire's knights. The Marquis explained his status and mentioned Miss Hassel's words. He quoted her as saying she had never wanted to be Rondell's partner. Randall immediately protested that it wasn't true and she would never agree to such a thing. The Marquis only said he would handle the paperwork later. He turned to a maid and asked her to take him to Miss Hassel. When he discovered she was living in the food pantry, he grew angry. He demanded to know why they would treat someone blind in one eye this way. Her parents immediately retorted that she was perfectly healthy. Rondell chimed in with them, saying that if that were true, they would have known right away. The Marquis realized that no one in the girl's family truly cared for her. He once again demanded to be taken to where they were keeping her. After that, he immediately followed the maid. The others watched the strange Marquis with suspicious eyes. It seemed only Cynthia watched him with a look of joy and longing, her heart fluttering at his handsome features. And that majestic air. She crossed her arms, suddenly realizing he would be the perfect candidate for her fiancé. Meanwhile, Luna was boredly packing her things, waiting for the Marquis to arrive. She slowly sorted through her old skirts and everything in the pantry. She didn't want to take much, grabbing only a few dresses. She also managed to get the memoir that had somehow survived. It was all she could grab before they locked her up. Now, she pensively examined the item that represented a part of her past life. She gently stroked the dress, as if feeling for something. In her hand was the brooch Rondell had given her for her last birthday. She now realized he had probably just ordered a servant to buy any old trinket. Everyone had forgotten her birthday that day, busy congratulating Celia, even though they were twins. This sad fact made her realize she didn't want to take the brooch with her. She tossed the brooch aside and began to pack the rest of her things. The girl froze when she heard a strange, distant sound. She was startled when the door was thrown open. Lunatia couldn't believe the Marquis had actually come for her. Her eyes widened, and a spark of joy began to burn in her heart. The Marquis offered her flowers, saying he had come to welcome his beloved bride. Luna blushed and asked why on earth he had brought flowers. He explained it was just a custom and suggested they set off. She quickly grabbed her bag and followed him. She was even more surprised when he naturally took the bag from her hands. Luna thanked him for his help, but he froze in place. They turned around when they heard Nicholas shouting Luna's name. He was with Rondell, who likewise had no intention of letting her go. Luna stared at these men who had never given her a second glance before. They circled her like vultures, unwilling to let their prey slip away. All these people were pressuring her, trying to get some kind of answer. Rondell started shaking her by the shoulders, but she pushed his hand away. She finally found her voice and told him to shut up. Randall froze, unable to believe that the ever-obedient Luna would act this way. After a brief pause, Lunatia announced she was going to marry Iltern. She added that from now on, she would no longer be at their beck and call to use her powers for them. The girl told them to stop interfering in her life. The Marquis said that from now on, they could only see her with his permission. He strictly forbade them from asking her to peer into their futures as they had before. Nicholas couldn't believe she had told the Marquis her secret. Lunatia replied that they would soon be family, and she saw no problem with it. Randall accused the Marquis of only caring about the girl's ability. He yelled at Luna to wake up and see who she was standing with. The girl said with disgust that they were the ones who had truly used her. She turned away, saying she had nothing more to say to them. Knox asked if she was sure she didn't want to say goodbye to her family. She turned and said that until this very moment, they hadn't even acknowledged the fact that she was blind. She bid a scornful farewell to the people she once considered family. After some time, they arrived at the Iltern residence. As Knox had ordered, the best room had been prepared for Lunatia. The girl was delighted by such a beautiful and spacious room. They had even thoughtfully prepared a vase with water for the girl's flowers. Urin added that her personal maid would be over shortly. He smiled and suggested she rest before dinner. The girl reminded him that she was supposed to predict the future for them once a day. Knox. Iltern said he remembered the terms of their deal. He said that while her gift was useful, she didn't have to use it every day. The girl couldn't believe he would pass up such an opportunity. He waved his hand, saying he would ask her personally if he needed anything. The man and his aide quickly left her room. The girl was suddenly left alone again. She was stunned that they had given her such a luxurious room for nothing. She began to rack her brain, trying to figure out why he had suddenly refused the gift. Unlike her father, he didn't think she had to laboriously perform her duties every day. From now on, she no longer had to cater to her family's selfish demands. It was all thanks to the only person who had shown her any kindness. She smiled, thinking how his gentle nature was a stark contrast to his intimidating reputation. Lunatia was happy to at least be able to hear his voice. Meanwhile, Urin had also noticed his kindness toward the girl. He began to tease him, saying his icy heart was finally melting. Knox reminded him that before retiring, he had never refused the favor of women. During the war, even women of the night had given him nicknames, and very passionate ones at that. Urin said he nearly died laughing when he heard about it. Knox threatened to make him pay, then admitted that the past was hard to escape. Every day, they were covered in the blood of their enemies, watching their comrades fall one by one. Knox froze when Urin mentioned he would be starting a family soon. He thought he couldn't just put Miss Hassel in danger. That day, he had noticed her hands trembling, stiff with fear of her family. He could see it in the way she clutched the bouquet to shield herself from their accusations. It was the first time he had felt such a strong desire to protect someone. Just then, a knight ran up to him, shouting that something had happened. A scout was found returning alone after scouting the forest. The man was badly injured and covered in bruises, as if he had been attacked. Meanwhile, Lunatia was getting to know her new maid. The girl bowed with a brilliant smile, which surprised Lunatia. Her former servants had cared for her family daily, but she herself had never enjoyed such exclusive service. Rosalind had said it was all for her own safety, but now before her stood a personal maid willing to do anything for her. Lunatia was happy to see the young girl's enthusiasm. She said she was glad to meet her and returned a warm smile. After a moment, Sierra asked if it was true that she was blind in her right eye. The girl immediately asked if the Marquis had told her that. She smiled and guessed that was exactly why she had been chosen as her maid. She mentioned that her sweetheart, who was also one of Knox's men, had also lost an eye. This meant Knox had confirmed beforehand that she was qualified for the job. 3 years ago, war had come to their lands and lasted for about 6 months. Amidst all the death, there was one man who would not back down no matter what. Sierra felt that Knox was just looking out for her, making things easier. Lunatia blushed without realizing it, moved by Knox's kindness. Everyone said he was a monster, but he was a very considerate person. Sierra went on about what a wonderful person he was. She mentioned that her boyfriend still served him even after being injured. Lunaria wondered why he still needed soldiers, but was quickly distracted by the offer of tea. Sierra cheerfully ran off to brew a new, delicious tea. Luna was won over by Sierra's sincere kindness. She had seemed a bit too energetic at first, but even that was starting to grow on Luna. Alone, she decided to continue writing in her memoir. She would update her journal regularly with new entries about her current situation. The girl wrote calmly that she didn't know how long it would be before she lost her other senses. This was precisely why she wanted to keep writing down everything she needed to do this year. She was happy to have made some wonderful new friends. After a while, she finally finished writing. She twirled the journal around and then decided to call it a day. Luna had written about everything she had endured at her family home, but now she had a real chance to make new memories. Luna suddenly realized Sierra hadn't returned yet. She quickly opened the door and found a girl crying. She rushed over, trying to figure out what had happened. It turned out her boyfriend, Robert, had suddenly gone missing. She had been talking about him so fondly just a short while ago, and now she couldn't stop crying. Apparently, his squad had been exploring the dense forest near the castle. It was said their squad had encountered a swarm of vampire bats. Lunaria was furious that such dangerous creatures lived nearby. She remembered only reading about such monsters in books. The girl thought they should send out a rescue party. Knox suddenly appeared behind her, saying he was just about to head out on a search. Luna realized he was going alone and felt a pang of worry. He said he had to find Robert before nightfall. Lunaria's attention turned back to Sierra's pained tears. She remembered the happy smile Sierra had when talking about her sweetheart. That joy had quickly turned into a feeling of pain and devastation. Lunatia clutched her chest, as if making some kind of resolution. Knox wasted no time, saying he was heading east. Urin wanted to stay behind for Sierra's sake, but she thanked and refused him. Urin suggested they calm down together, but she disagreed. She stated flatly that it was time to fulfill their agreement. Even Mr. Knox himself was taken aback by her sharp words. He still wasn't quite sure how her ability worked. He turned and asked her point blank if she could find Robert. The girl told him to hold out his hand, saying she would try. She tried to concentrate, closing her eyes tightly. A million terrible scenarios flashed before her eyes, like Robert being mauled to death by some wild animal. She imagined Sierra's heart-wrenching cries, followed by the man's funeral. Lunatia's eyes snapped open, and she recoiled as if burned. Knox saw her shock and thought it best to ask what she had seen. She stammered, barely able to admit that in her vision, they hadn't made it in time. Knox froze, unable to believe what he had just heard. She mentioned a bear with a crescent-shaped scar on its forehead. It would attack Robert in a cave that looked like its den. Knox immediately pointed out that the squad was exploring a different area of the forest. Yuri immediately seized on these words, his mind already racing. The girl begged him to trust her and follow her to the cave to find Robert. Knox countered that if she was wrong, he could die without a proper burial. Lunatia met his gaze as he told her that he believed her. He ordered a team of soldiers to head east where Robert was. As for himself, he would go straight into the bear's den, the place the young lady had mentioned. Lunatia immediately protested that it was too dangerous to go alone. In response, the man simply caressed her cheek and told her not to worry. He confidently promised that thanks to her ability, they would both come back alive. His gentle words managed to soothe the worried girl. After that, Knox leaped back and ordered Urin to move out. Urin followed him, saying he didn't have to act so tough. Lunatia crossed her arms, praying for their safe return. She didn't know how the operation would unfold, but she hoped for the best. The girl didn't even realize she had been sitting like that until evening. She vaguely remembered dozing off while waiting for the Marquis. The girl woke with a start, realizing it was already night. The next moment, she ran into Urin, who greeted her with a smile. Lunatia immediately peppered him with questions about the man's whereabouts. He just smiled happily and suggested she go see them for herself. The woman found the couple reunited after their separation. Luna was overjoyed, incredibly happy that they were all right. It turned out that during the bat attack, Robert had lost his footing and fallen off a cliff. He decided to spend the night in a cave, which happened to be a bear's den. Urin added that thanks to her, they had managed to rescue Robert. Both of them fell silent when they heard Lord Knox's voice. He saw the girl smile and said that a single bear was no match for him. The man bowed his head and sincerely thanked her for her help. The woman told him to raise his head, saying she was only doing her duty. He replied that she had chosen to help them of her own free will. Knox thanked her again, saying they couldn't have succeeded without her. She was surprised by his gratitude, which was so unusual. Before, her gift had been treated as an obligation and taken completely for granted. Urin interjected that they had briefly mentioned her help to the couple. They immediately ran over to thank her for her assistance. Lunatia was a little embarrassed by the thanks. She suddenly remembered there was something she wanted to ask Knox. Luna asked what he was looking for in a place called Moonlight Grove. The moment the words left her lips, she felt a sharp wave of discomfort. She didn't understand why her vision was suddenly going dark. The girl suddenly fainted, startling him. It seemed the backlash from not using her power for so long had finally caught up with her. She lost consciousness completely and dreamed she was back in her childhood. The little girl was crying alone in the corner of an empty room. Then, an old woman who looked just like her appeared out of nowhere. She began to comfort the crying girl, gently stroking her back. The little girl finally sobbed that her father had scolded her harshly. She had tried to mediate for Rosalind and Soleil, who were arguing over something trivial, but her older sister had roughly pushed her away. She accidentally bumped into Cynthia, who then burst into tears. The old woman insisted she had done nothing wrong and would go talk to her father. The little girl asked her grandmother why her father was always so angry with her. She thought it was because she looked different from everyone else. The girl thought that if she could be like her grandmother, everyone would love her. The old woman held her tightly, saying she never wanted to use this gift again. She confessed that it was a curse and swore she would find people who would love her for who she was. Finally, she said that she loved her very much, even without the gift. Her grandmother was the only person who had ever truly loved Lunatia. After she died of illness, her gift was passed on to Luna, who completely forgot her grandmother's words. It wasn't until later that she realized her grandmother had been completely right. After a while, she finally opened her eyes. Sierra was standing before her, a worried look on her face. The girl's eyes widened in surprise. She had no idea how long she had been unconscious. The maid told her it had been a full 3 hours. She also mentioned that Lunatia had collapsed into Lord Knox's arms. After that, he had immediately carried her to the lounge to rest. The maid added happily that he had held her like a princess. Hearing this, Luna felt a flush of heat rise to her face in embarrassment. Sierra suddenly decided to express her gratitude for her help. She bowed deeply, feeling that words couldn't express her thanks. Lunatia tried to brush it off, saying it was no big deal. The maid eagerly interjected, promising they would do everything they could to repay her kindness. She mentioned that Lord Knox was already waiting for her for dinner. Sierra happily pointed to the dining table, inviting her over. Lunatia absent-mindedly followed her and took a seat. After a moment, she approached Knox, who seemed lost in thought. She tried to explain that she had simply been exhausted from the day's events and had completely passed out. Lunatia apologized for keeping him waiting. The man replied that it was fine and asked her to take a seat at the table. As soon as she sat down opposite him, plates of food were brought out. The girl found an exquisite dish placed right in front of her. Her stomach rumbled with hunger, and she eagerly took a bite. I think even she was surprised by how delicious the dish was. Knox calmly commented that she had quite an appetite. The girl wanted to savor the deliciousness as much as possible before it disappeared. Even a master himself noticed how heartily she was eating. He was immediately reminded of one of his subordinates, who always happily ate whatever food he was given. Sadly, he was struck by a poisoned arrow during the war. Before he died, he only asked to be freed from his pain. Lunatia understood his unspoken words and asked if his request had been granted. Knox agreed, saying he would fight for any life that could be saved. He then suddenly remembered her saying to get rid of her if she became a burden. The man asked if she was still so sure about that now. After hearing his story, Miss Hassel paused for a moment before saying yes. She added with a smile that she was well aware of what was happening and was not afraid. She said he turned out to be a good person, which surprised him. He quietly admitted that he had overstepped a bit with her. Lunatia didn't catch what he said and asked him to repeat it. The man just flusteredly told her to forget about it. She was surprised when he announced that he owed her an apology. He remembered carrying Lunatia back to her bedroom that night. It turned out he had caught a glimpse of an open book on her desk. She immediately panicked, trying to figure out what exactly he had read. He apologized, saying he had only seen the open page. Knox also said it was cute how she kept a private journal. He looked at her and couldn't help but picture her as a small puppy. The man recalled her writing about wanting to see the scenery and decided to take her somewhere. He smirked confidently, promising to show her a magnificent view. A short while later, he led her to a clearing in the woods. She was about to say they couldn't see anything in such darkness, but he said that while you couldn't see the stars or moon in this forest, there was something he wanted to show her. The next moment, the girl noticed a brightly glowing abdomen. Lunaria was amazed to find that the entire forest was filled with them. She was struck by the beauty of the sight, something she never knew existed. The man said they were called moonfire flies and only appeared at night. He gently stroked the girl's back, asking how she felt. It seemed his surprise was a great success, and Lunaria was ecstatic. Her smile was so radiant that it made the Marquis happy in spite of himself. These fireflies were closely related to the moonlight grove she had asked about earlier, which was very famous, because the grass that grew there had special properties. Legend had it that this herb could create miracles and that a magic stone was also hidden in the forest. Luna immediately remembered having read a similar legend before. Just then, Knox decided to reveal the true purpose of his visit. He confessed that he had come to find this meadow on the orders of the heir to the Empire. Luna's heart skipped a beat as she realized he was talking about the future emperor. She understood in an instant that Knox was on a mission of the utmost importance. He added that the stone could be presented to the Empress as a gift. Knox also clarified that it was his friend who had personally asked him to do this. For some time, they had found several stone tablets engraved with an ancient code. They had hoped to find the place after deciphering the code, but it had all been for naught. Luna couldn't help but wonder if she could help his mission succeed. The man noticed the weather was changing and suggested they return to the castle. The moment she called him master, he froze completely. He said he wanted to ask her to use a completely different title. Knox looked directly into her eyes, reminding her that she would soon be his wife. It seemed Luna herself realized how strange the formal title was. When she suggested calling him Lord Knox, he agreed. The man gave her a deep look and said he would also call her by her first name from now on. Luna suddenly realized that she felt warm and calm when she was with him. The man gallantly offered his arm and asked if he could escort her. He said it was because her eyes couldn't see and it would be inconvenient for her to get around. The girl quickly agreed and held out her hand to him. Time passed relentlessly, and a whole month had gone by since that day. Lunatia's father had run into one new predicament after another. He had been cheated by the merchant to whom he had sold his orchard. A loophole in the contract had caused them to lose the entire dam estate. He realized once again that none of this would have happened if Lunatia had been there. Her mother sadly mentioned that she had been hoping for Lunatia to return. Ever since she left, Solia's grades had plummeted. Even little Cynthia no longer attended social gatherings. Unlike the rest of her family, Rosalind was doing splendidly on her own, having achieved considerable success in the business world. Nicholas flew into a rage, yelling that they had severed all ties with the Alati family. He kept ranting, blaming all their troubles on Luna, who had run away from home. Rosalind hid behind the door, secretly eavesdropping on their conversation. She was about to slip away when her assistant appeared with the month's sales figures. He seemed to be preparing her for bad news and bowed respectfully. The results were terrible. Her face fell. She angrily crumpled the paper, knowing that a major change had to be made. It turned out she had been lying to her parents, telling them business was going well. Meanwhile, the main financial pillar of their family was living a carefree life in the castle. It had been a whole month since she had finally gained her freedom. One of those days, the girl ran in a hurry to find Knox. Lunatia ran straight to him and called out the code word they had agreed upon. She offered to divine the future for him before the expedition. To her surprise, Knox refused, saying they would take a safe route. He also reminded her that it was thanks to her that they had avoided the ferocious wolf. However, Lunatia remembered their agreement. Before she could finish, he gently caressed her cheek. He looked her straight in the eye with utmost seriousness and stated again that he would not honor that agreement. Furthermore, he reminded her how she had slept for 3 whole days after using her ability last time. Lunatia knew he was right, but she began to argue anyway. His assistant chimed in that his little wife was just trying to help. He added with a laugh that Knox's lovely wife had even baked cookies for them. A soldier said that Robert was jealous because she was getting too close to Sierra. Knox watched thoughtfully as his men praised Lunatia. He couldn't help but recall the wish the girl had written in her diary. Luna shyly admitted that she had always wanted to bake cookies for others. Knox calmly pointed out that all his subordinates were charmed by her. He added that he also quite liked the cookies the girl made. Lunatia beamed and sincerely thanked him for the compliment. Meanwhile, all the subordinates were happily watching their superior. The moment he glanced at them, they immediately pretended to be talking about something else. Yurin turned to the girl and said they were just going to scout the area for any useful resources. These orders came directly from the Crown Prince himself. Lunatia immediately guessed that he and Knox were on good terms. The next moment, the Marquis leaped onto his horse and announced it was time to depart. The girl cheerfully placed a hand on her chest and said she would wait for them. Lunatia shouted after him, asking him to be careful. During his absence, the girl kept herself busy with various matters. She was grateful to have so many wonderful people around her. Sierra smiled and said they had finally gotten the stove lit. Lunatia decided to bake some cookies and asked for a baking sheet. Deep down, she realized she really wanted to help all these people. She tried to foresee what Knox's future would be like a year from now, but the vision was very blurry. Afterwards, she slept for nearly 3 days, though she didn't get the results she wanted. Her right eye had gone completely blind, and she could no longer foresee the distant future. She didn't know how quickly Knox would find out she had lost her perceptive abilities. Fortunately, Lunatia could still see the near future. She turned and saw Sierra staring blankly at a bowl of berries. Robert had brought them back from an expedition, but they turned out to be terribly sour. Seeing the girl's comically vexed expression, Lunatia broke into a radiant smile. Sierra tried to talk her out of trying them, but she was curious and wanted to test her senses. Meanwhile, Crown Prince Jindal was reading a letter that had arrived. He turned to the sound of a messenger bird flying in through the window. The man chuckled, guessing it was a message from the Moon Eater himself. He was pleased, though he suspected the letter was actually written by Urin. The letter said the search was proceeding as planned, and that he would send a report soon. The next second, he was stunned to learn that he was taking a bride. Urin also mentioned that the cold and ruthless Knox was quite pleased with her. The prince was thrilled to hear such joyous news from his friend. Knox had never let any woman get even remotely close to him. Before this, the crown prince had made it clear that he had to meet this remarkable lady in person. Meanwhile, Knox's report stated that Lunatia was not feeling well. Sierra was worried, having noticed some serious changes in her friend. She said that Lunatia had been acting strangely ever since they baked that cake. She had even completely stopped drinking her favorite tea and eating sweets. Arun chimed in that the staff hadn't received any of her little treats anymore either. He had noticed it from the sad faces of all the soldiers. Knox had been thinking, realizing she had barely touched her dinner lately. All of this pointed to one thing. She had lost her sense of taste. Sierra, not knowing all the details, just thought Luna was unwell. Knox realized he hadn't spent quality time with his girl in far too long. He decided it was time to put down his paperwork and find out for himself. The man stood up and announced he wanted to talk to her in person. He concluded by saying it was his duty to be with his wife during her difficult times. Urin immediately concluded that the notorious nightlife master was back. The man ordered him to shut up, saying he was young and foolish back then. It seemed his threat worked on Urin, who decided to keep his mouth shut. He quietly told Sierra that the old Knox had been quite the ladies' man. The assistant smiled and said he was glad to see Knox so happy. It seemed his words didn't annoy her, but instead made her pensive. He remembered how excited Luna was when she saw the fireflies. He thought that as long as he knew what she wanted, he could make her happy. Sierra smiled and suggested that Luna needed a change of scenery with him. She hinted that they should go to the city and enjoy some time alone together. They were interrupted by a maid, who announced the arrival of an important guest. Before she could finish, the crown prince suddenly appeared behind her. Knox narrowed his eyes, as if he had a splitting headache, and asked why he had to come today, of all days. The prince said he missed him after receiving some interesting news. Urin immediately rushed over to explain why he had written to the prince. Knox tried to point out that he hadn't asked for it, but Urin had a different opinion. The prince winked and said bluntly that he was here to see the young lady. The Marquis wasted no time in telling Lunatia the news, and she was indeed surprised. The man added that the crown prince was already waiting for her in the drawing room. Prince Gondal von Lazenras was an only child. He was quite independent, intelligent, and very sociable. Lunatia was stunned that someone like him would want to see her. Knox said he could throw the prince out if she wasn't interested. She only asked for a little time to prepare herself. She added that she didn't want to embarrass Knox or be rude. Knox wanted to argue, but ultimately decided not to stop her. The man was about to say something, but suddenly closed his mouth and froze. He decided to leave the room and told her to let him know if she got tired of the prince. Knox joked that he would just throw him into the forest to feed the wolves. This light-hearted taunt made the girl laugh. She couldn't help it. After a moment, she finally decided to go and meet the prince. She greeted him with a polite curtsy, stunning him with her beauty. To her surprise, the young man held out his hand and told her to dispense with all formalities. He smiled warmly and said he had never been fond of them. Afterwards, he asked her to sit next to him so they could talk. Lunatia quickly took her seat, realizing the rumors about him were completely true. The prince slyly asked her how she managed to land someone like Knox. They were both well aware that Knox wouldn't just marry anyone. Even so, Lunatia couldn't reveal all the details of their agreement. Before the meeting, the prince had already done a deep dive into the history of the Hassel family. From some old records, he learned that her family was said to possess the gift of foresight. The crown prince perfectly recited the legend of her family's gift. Lunatia felt a wave of panic, realizing their secret was out. In the end, she confidently declared it was just nonsense made up by their ancestors. A legend wasn't really going to stop the prince, especially when he was searching for the Moonlight Grove. He decided to play along, telling her he wasn't surprised she was getting married. Her family had always hidden their gift from the royal family to avoid interfering with the fate of the empire. Suddenly, the prince said he could even propose for her to dump Knox and marry him instead. Lunatia was so stunned by this bombshell that she froze on the spot. Euron immediately lost his composure and shouted that he couldn't do that. The prince grinned smugly and asked if Euron had been eavesdropping. Euron accused the prince of trying to steal his master's happiness. Knox's happiness. Little did he know, the Marquis himself was listening to his every word. He revealed himself when they called for him to testify. Lunatia was practically trembling with excitement, wondering how Knox would react to all this. The man stepped forward and declared that he had chosen Lunatia as his future wife. Because of that, he thought backing out now would be a complete screw-up. The girl immediately retorted that she hadn't considered such a thing at all. Everyone before had only seen her for her abilities, but with him, she finally felt happy. The prince had finally gotten the answer he wanted and admitted he hadn't believed Euron's letter at first. He claimed that for the first time ever, his old friend was completely smitten with a woman. Knox told him to shut up, reminding him that he already had a fiancée. His father had even approved the girl as the future empress. However, Jindal considered it just a political marriage and wanted to play the field, if you know what I mean. This remark let Lunatia know exactly what kind of interesting sense of humor this prince had. If not for that, she would have thought they had figured her out and were going to snatch her for her abilities. Finally, the man raised his hand and announced he had something to deliver. Knox was taken aback when he saw the guy holding a letter. It turned out he had come all this way just to deliver a letter from the emperor himself. In it, the emperor gushed about how excited he was about Knox's marriage. He even wanted them to have the wedding right at the imperial palace and offered to pay for everything. Before he could react, Knox snatched the letter from the guy's hand. He remembered being granted the privilege of not having to obey the emperor's orders. Jindal just smirked again, saying that such a good offer shouldn't be refused. He added that if they didn't get married, the Hassel family would continue to act like complete jerks. Lunatia immediately jumped up, asking what this had to do with them. The prince called out from a distance that they hadn't gotten over the fact that she had left high society. High society still couldn't believe Knox was married, but the Viscount was taking advantage of it. He had been going all over town proclaiming that their family was under the protection of the Iltern family. Lunatia couldn't believe he had the audacity to do such a thing. Knox was just as surprised, but he played it cool and asked him to repeat himself. He had been spreading rumors that he married off his daughter to squeeze some money out of her in-laws. It seemed the Viscount had decided to seize this opportunity to put their family in the spotlight. He thought the Marquis was too secluded to hear the rumors. Lunatia felt a wave of shame that these people were still trying to climb the social ladder. She couldn't believe they were calling her their dear daughter in public. Knox noticed her sadness and said he would deal with them personally. The girl felt ashamed for causing Knox so much trouble. The prince added that the bride's family was obligated to attend the wedding. They needed to show that Luna had completely cut ties with her family. Euron loved the idea and agreed they deserved to be taught a lesson. Jindal said he was very much looking forward to seeing Knox and Lunatia's former family make a scene. After that was said, Luna realized the prince had researched everything about her. He asked what their choice would be in a tone that sounded like he was dragging them into some kind of trouble. Knox and Lunatia exchanged a tense look, as if weighing their options. In the end, the man said they should agree, but he was willing to consider Luna's wishes. Luna didn't really want to see her family, but she agreed anyway. She declared with fighting spirit that she was ready to face them head-on. Her answer satisfied Jindal, after which he said the ceremony would be wonderful. He said he would arrange all the details with her father and let them know a specific date. He gently kissed her hand and asked her to take care of his idiot friend. The prince annoyed Knox, who reminded him that he was just about to leave. Jindal retorted that he was a grumpy old man and said his goodbyes before leaving. Knox wearily touched his forehead, as if he had just taken on another headache. Luna's mind was immediately filled with thoughts about the upcoming meeting. Knox knew this decision was a difficult one for her. He respected that. Meanwhile, Cynthia was thinking about how much she loved her family. She was happy that her mom and dad always spoiled her. Even her older sister Rosalind and older brother Solly were always nice to her. She loved Lunatia even more because she always gave her what she wanted. At that moment, she was watching her father's jaw drop at the news that his daughter was marrying Iltern. Nicholas had been angry ever since Lunatia left home. The girl missed her sister, as life had become much harder without her gift. On top of that, she really missed the impressive Marquis. Nicholas knew their presence would mean that Lunatia was no longer a part of this family. That meant they could no longer hide behind the Marquis's name. His wife tried to blame her husband, but he snapped at her to shut up. Nicholas calculated that he could cozy up to some powerful nobles. It seemed Cynthia had just learned about her sister's upcoming engagement. She decided she would meet him at the party and win his heart for good. The child was convinced he was marrying Lunatia for her special abilities. Inspired by her own brilliant idea, she burst into her parents' study. She smiled at them and pleaded to go to her sister's engagement party. Meanwhile, the Marquis of Iltern had just started talking about preparations. Urin said they should probably find a dress for the bride-to-be first. He insisted that Lunatia must look radiant at their wedding. The assistant winked at Knox and suggested they go shopping in the city. The girl froze when Knox announced he was ready to go to the shops. He decided to stick to his guns, saying he only wanted to go with her, just the two of them. Lunatia immediately remembered how much he hated appearing in public. Knox countered that he didn't care about that, and she shouldn't worry either. Urin smirked and said he needed to practice his skills in asking a lady out. Knox suppressed his annoyance and calmly stood up. He walked over to her and said he really wanted to take a walk with her. He asked so directly that it even made her blush. Seeing her flustered, he asked again if she would accompany him. Lunatia quickly agreed and then started worrying about what she should wear. Eventually, they arrived in the city, and she was struck by its beauty. She had expected it to be bustling, but it was much quieter than she had anticipated. Knox mentioned that his older brother was currently managing the city, and so Lunatia unexpectedly found out he had a brother. Lost in thought, she didn't immediately notice his outstretched hand. She was surprised when he offered his arm before they went inside. Knox explained it was because of her poor eyesight and that she might get lost in the crowd. She knew it was just him being considerate, but it still made her very embarrassed. She reached out and took his hand, feeling her heart pound in her chest. And so, they walked hand in hand all the way to the shop. A few minutes later, a shopkeeper greeted them, calling them a sweet couple. The man smiled and asked if they wanted some fresh apples. He started gushing about how delicious and sweet they were. This season, the shopkeeper handed Lunatia an apple, telling her to try it. She was so flustered, she almost forgot she had lost part of her sense of taste. Not wanting to arouse any suspicion, she quickly took a bite. Unsure of what to do, Lunatia decided to smile and fake it. Seeing her smile, the shopkeeper reminded her not to let Mr. Knox find out. Knox didn't react to what he said and just tugged on Lunatia's arm. He pulled the girl away so quickly that the guy didn't have time to react. The Marquis practically teleported her into an alley, seeming genuinely annoyed. The next second, he had her pinned against a wall, scaring her. She had no idea why he was suddenly so angry. Knox said he hated being deceived and that he could tell when she was lying. She tried to tell him she didn't know what he was talking about, but he told her to cut the crap. He looked her straight in the eye and told her he could see right through her. Knox mentioned how fake her reaction had been just now. He explained that he had colluded with the shopkeeper to switch her apple with a sour one. Luna was so shocked that she accidentally dropped the apple on the ground. She didn't know how he would react if he found out she was losing her 5 senses. Luna was afraid he would send her back to her parents' home or forbid her from using her abilities. She couldn't accept either of those options. They might take everything from her. No one had ever cared for her the way he did. The man sighed wearily and said he suspected she had a secret. He asked her to confess why she wanted him to take care of her in the future. It seemed the question caught her off guard, and she immediately fell silent. The Marquis was determined to get an answer, but his younger brother called him over. A smiling young man named Sook immediately met his gaze. He pulled down his hood and said he was just on patrol. Luna was surprised because he looked nothing like Knox. The moment he saw her, she felt she should introduce herself. She bowed respectfully and said her name was Lunatia Hassel. She was about to apologize for meeting in such a place, but he interrupted her. He returned the bow and said he was very happy to meet her. Unlike Knox, this man's gentle smile was simply captivating. He reminded her of a squirrel she had once caught in the Solly Forest. Sook was happy that his stubborn older brother had finally found a bride. He grinned and told her how much he had been looking forward to meeting her. Before Luna could respond, Knox told her to step aside, as if he didn't want to speak at all. He left in a hurry, telling Sook not to loiter in the alley. The young man lowered his head and said that Knox hadn't been home at all recently. He called His Majesty's order regarding the plant in a moonlit fields complete nonsense. Luna also felt it was meaningless to do so much just for a gift for the Empress. She had previously thought the entire mission was the Empress's own wish. Sook asked if there was another reason behind it. Knox calmly replied that even if there was, it had nothing to do with him. The young man protested, saying he wanted to take back everything that should have been his. He sadly admitted he wasn't cut out to be a leader. Knox was surprised, saying he had been considering passing the position of patriarch to him. Sook was about to correct him, but Knox cut him off, saying it was their mother's wish. Before he could finish, Sook's condition took a sharp turn for the worse. Luna immediately supported him, clearly worried about his health. Knox coldly told him to get some fresh air. This was all he needed. Afterwards, they carefully helped him to the main street. When Luna saw her sister in the distance, she froze. At first, she tried to figure out why, but then decided she must have been mistaken. Sook coughed, and she immediately told him to take slow, deep breaths. Knox asked where his bodyguards were, and that firecracker fiancé who followed him around town. Before Sook could answer, they heard an angry girl's voice. The quiet young man's fiancée stood with her arms crossed, glaring at them. She began to scold Lord Sook for suddenly abandoning her. She spoke contemptuously to Luna, ordering her to take her hands off her fiancé. Sook demanded that Ruby not speak to his brother's bride-to-be in that tone. She urged the man to leave, while he said he was being taken care of. The girl promised to give him medicine once they were back in the carriage. She sneered at Knox, wishing him no peace in his wanderings for the moonlight herb. She also said that her and Sook's future child would become the heir of the ill-turned family. It seemed Knox was already familiar with the girl's bad temper, so he didn't react at all. When it was just the two of them left, he explained that she was the only daughter of Marquis Fawn. Luna immediately racked her brain, tried to remember the very familiar name. Finally, she remembered. She recalled that his wife was an important figure in high society. Luna's mother had desperately tried to curry favor with her, but to no avail. Knox decided to continue on their way as it was getting late. She squeezed his hand, realizing she had actually succeeded in keeping her secret. She quickly corrected herself, because it was Knox who had made it all possible. Now it felt wrong to hide such an important detail from him. She made up her mind on the spot to tell him all her secrets. It just wasn't the right time yet. Eventually, they wandered into an ultra-luxurious jewelry store. A salesperson greeted them with a smile and began their sales pitch. Knox cut straight to the chase and asked him to pick out a few sets of jewelry. Luna tried to talk him out of buying her so many things. The man suddenly confessed that he simply enjoyed dressing her up. The sudden remark took her by surprise, and her face instantly turned red. Just then, the consultant brought over some top-tier, A-grade jewelry. Luna immediately grew excited and examined each piece carefully. Suddenly, she had a flashback to the time she saw her sister. Luna still couldn't be sure if it was really her or just a look-alike. Meanwhile, at Rosalind's shop, a major commotion was about to unfold. After hours of studying her competitors, she pushed open the door in extreme frustration. Her subordinate was immediately terrified and started to flatter her. Rosalind snapped at him to shut up, then said their shop was packed with customers. She slammed a report in front of him, demanding an explanation for the sharp decline in sales. The man bowed deeply and said he was just following her orders. His body couldn't help but tremble and go limp with fear. Rosalind was furious that she could no longer use Lunatia. She turned around and told the man he was fired. He begged her to reconsider, but she was already lost in thought. With a dark expression, she opened her office door to see a mountain of paperwork. She absent-mindedly picked up the first paper at hand from her desk. It had a drawing of that same phantom plant. She was certain that once she found those jewel fruits, her sales would skyrocket. The girl smirked, deciding that this herb had to be hers. Meanwhile, Alterna Castle was filled with joyous shouts. Sierra was thrilled with everything they had bought. The maid couldn't stop smiling at the sight of the beautiful Luna. Every dress was so dazzling that they had a hard time choosing one for the banquet. Sierra was so nervous, it was as if her life depended on the choice. The girl smiled and suggested taking a break before the next fitting. Before Luna could object, the other girl ran off to make tea. Luna thought she should take off the dress so she wouldn't accidentally stain it. The girl stood frozen in the middle of the room, surrounded by the lavish gifts, lost in thought. At the Hassel estate, she was the only one who almost never received anything new. That was why the stern Marquis's words had touched her so much. Even though the lines sounded a bit cheesy, it still made her smile. She whipped around at the sound of a familiar noise. Thinking it was Sierra, she unexpectedly ran into the Marquis himself. I guess she was so stunned, she completely forgot what she was wearing. The girl immediately tried to cover herself under her future husband's gaze. Knox was supposed to be used to seeing women, but he was still flustered. He declared he would turn around and then asked if he should just leave. Then he noticed a bell-shaped birthmark on her chest. Hearing the story behind it, he thought about the hardships she had been through. She agreed, saying that at first, she was just an accessory to her heir brother. From then on, she was treated like dirt until she became strong. After that, they started paying attention to her, and she had to admit it felt good. She added with a bitter smile that they only saw her as a useful tool. Knox pondered her words, saying the metaphor was fitting. He looked into her eyes and patted the sofa next to him. Luna, still embarrassed, sat down beside him. After a short silence, Knox mentioned that his mother had treated him the same way. His sudden confession caught Luna off guard, and her jaw dropped in surprise. She wanted to hear more, but Sierra burst in. When she saw the two of them sitting together, she blushed with embarrassment. She immediately tried to shoo Mr. Knox away, saying he shouldn't be there. Knox tried to explain, but she was convinced it was something else. In the end, she physically pushed him out of the room, shouting about protecting her lady's honor. And just like that, the master of the estate was kicked out by his own servant. The man sighed wearily, realizing he had almost let his secret slip. This urge to share made him realize he had grown attached to Luna. Luna's initial request to die still bothered him. Finally, another day passed, and the long-awaited ceremony arrived. The splendidly dressed newlyweds proudly strolled through the imperial palace. Everyone present was completely focused on the bride and groom. Many were surprised, seeing Lunatia Hassel for the first time. Only the crown prince smiled with satisfaction as he watched the couple. The gathered nobles eagerly gossiped about the man who had lived like a hermit. They also didn't shy away from discussing Luna, whose father had boasted about their love. Hearing the chatter, Luna began to search the crowd for her family. Knox, sensing her thoughts, suggested they go to Jindal. He was hosting tonight, as the emperor never made an appearance. Luna processed the new information and agreed. She was about to walk forward, but froze when she heard a familiar voice. When she saw the detestable face, she narrowed her eyes in disgust. Standing before her was Rondell, her disgraced ex-fiancé. Meanwhile, Soleil and Cynthia were waiting for their sister. Cynthia had Marquis Elterna on her mind and called out to her brother. She spread her arms and asked if she looked lovely today. Soleil was surprised by her question, which she had been asking all morning. Cynthia shrieked that tonight had to be perfect. Besides, their mom and Rosalind hadn't shown up, and Dad was bowing to everyone. Soleil was stuck with the heavy duty of babysitting. He, like everyone else, thought their family life was paradise before Luna left. Meanwhile, Rondell had been staring at the couple with a murderous gaze. Luna hadn't expected to run into him before seeing her own family. Rondell decided to speak, saying the bride had become even more beautiful. He said he would forgive the scene she caused and suggested she reconsider. Luna, feeling a surge of anger, told him to say that again. She cut him off in an icy tone, asking what he meant by that. Rondell's face turned red as he declared that she was still deeply in love with him. The man moved closer to her, as if to pressure her. He whispered in her ear that he could expose her little secret. She looked at Knox, thankful she had dodged a bullet by not marrying Rondell. To her worthless ex-fiancé's surprise, she simply gave him a sweet smile. His face immediately lit up, thinking she had finally come to her senses. She simply greeted him politely, as if he were a stranger. Her businesslike tone brought him back to reality. She added in a weary voice that their engagement was off, and she wanted nothing more to do with him. Rondell pointed at her in shock, saying she was the one who wanted it that way. Before he could lunge at her again, a rock-solid hand grabbed his shoulder. He snarled at the loser, asking if he really thought he could threaten his wife. Knox warned him that if he ever tried anything again, he would burn his life to the ground. He also added that no one would believe his whining about the Hassel family's gift. Knox mentioned that Rondell was about to be kicked out of the second division for messing up. Rondell panicked even more when he realized Knox knew even that. The man simply stated that from now until the end of his life, he would know nothing but failure. He glared at him and told him to never come near his wife again. Afterwards, he returned to Luna, saying he was just wasting time. The man gently caressed the girl's hand, as if she were the most precious thing in the world. She smiled sweetly and said he was absolutely right. They had almost forgotten about the annoying Rondell until they saw him behind them. The girl looked him over with a disdainful gaze, as if he were nobody. He started to roar that this was all wrong, that Luna was supposed to be his bride. Rondell shouted in frustration that his future was supposed to be perfect. Then he bit his lip and pointed a finger at the Marquis with a furious look. He couldn't hold back any longer and challenged Knox to a duel. It sounded so arrogant that it disgusted Knox. Luna asked in surprise what on earth he was talking about. Rondell cited the imperial law that permitted duels. Luna shouted that Knox didn't have to agree to something so foolish. Even so, the man was ready to settle this once and for all. After a short silence, Knox mentioned his words about a fair duel. He asked if he was really resorting to such desperate measures now that he was cornered. He added with a smile that he would commend his guts and accept the challenge. Luna tried to stop him from doing something so pointless, but he told her to step back. The Crown Prince jumped into the chaos and started clapping. It seemed he was the one who wanted this to happen the most. He smiled pleasantly at everyone, saying he had overheard their conversation. Luna immediately looked at Prince Jendel. Jendel said with concern that all the fun things happen around his friend and his bride-to-be. It seemed he wanted to turn the whole thing into a real show. He smirked and said this was much more interesting than some boring ball. Rondell, feeling he could get justice, requested permission for the duel. He added that if he won, he wanted to become Luna's fiancé again. The prince waved his hand and said he approved the duel. Luna was shocked that he agreed so quickly. Jendel looked at his friend, waiting for his conditions for the duel. Knox calmly said that his opponent had better not even think about getting near Luna again. The prince accepted their wagers and got everyone's attention. He was ready to give everyone a dramatic introduction to the upcoming duel. Jendel pointed at Luna, blaming her for everything that was happening. He added that because of her, these two men were about to have a big fight. The prince dramatically spread his arms, calling it an opera-like scene. He introduced the contestants, one of whom was a knight and her ex-fiancée. On the other side of the arena was the man known as the Holy Sword. He declared that not everyone gets a chance to witness such an epic scene. Everyone present was filled with anticipation for the show that was about to unfold. That was why Prince Jendel had turned the duel into a grand spectacle. Luna had never seen Knox fight with a sword. She started to sweat nervously, as fencing was Rondell's specialty. She knew her ex-fiancé's true colors, that rotten man. It seemed Knox sensed that his own bride-to-be was worried for him. He smirked and said he wouldn't lose to that brainless bastard. Knox added that it was all a sham anyway, and Jendel would take care of it. His words gave Luna confidence, and she said she would trust him and watch. After that, Knox's mind drifted, as if he had suddenly remembered something. He suddenly asked her that after he won, she would tell him all her secrets. Luna was taken aback, as she couldn't make up her mind. Finally, she gathered her courage and agreed to his proposal. The man just looked at her calmly and asked her to promise him. Knox smiled gently and said he was much more motivated now. After a while, the preparations for the duel were finally complete. Everyone present held their breath, waiting for the moonlit battle to begin. He ordered the weapons to be brought to the duelists. When two identical swords were brought out, Knox immediately and calmly picked up a plain, unremarkable sword. Unlike him, Rondell looked much more nervous. The prince said that whoever knelt first would lose. Luna immediately looked at her opponent, who looked determined. Rondell told himself that Knox's skills were a thing of the past. He was already calculating how badly he would be beaten. He knew that even with his gift, the division had accepted him for his skills. Rondell squeezed his eyes shut, trying to believe he was strong and invincible. He thought that if he just won this, everything would go back to normal. The prince declared the start of the match, and their eyes met. Rondell let out a battle cry and charged straight at his opponent. He tried to take him down in one blow, but Knox skillfully blocked it. Everyone was excited to see Count Eladi's son taking the initiative. The nobles all believed in his insane fencing talent. Rondel's arrogance made even Luna a little worried. Janelle said Knox was just showing off for his girl. As always, the prince said it would be too boring if Knox just knocked the guy down right away. Knox was just putting on a show for everyone, demonstrating his strength. Hearing this, Luna realized he wasn't even trying his best. The prince smirked, saying even he could beat Rondel. Knox could have taken him down with one punch, but he wanted to teach him a lesson. The prince said slyly that even his legendary patience had its limits. After that, Knox completely overwhelmed his opponent with a single blow. In an instant, Rondel was on the ground, looking like a complete fool. Even the greedy nobles couldn't see how quickly Rondel had fallen. Rondel started to stammer that it was impossible. Knox just replied coldly that his defeat was obvious from the start. He claimed he couldn't lose to a kid who had never seen a battlefield. Knox sneered that he should have been training instead of chasing after Lunatia. These words were the final straw that broke Rondel's honor. He also demanded that he not forget his promise to stay away from Lunatia. Rondel didn't dare say a word and turned his head away in shame. Afterwards, the prince proudly introduced the new victor to everyone. All the ladies immediately surrounded Knox, eager to shower him with praise. Luna was shocked to see even her sister, Cynthia, chasing after him. She started gushing about how amazing he was and how thrilled she felt. The girl hurriedly stated her name, saying they had actually met before. She tried to confess her feelings, but Knox just walked silently towards Luna. It turned out the Marquis only cared about receiving praise from one girl. Luna smiled warmly and sincerely congratulated him on his victory. She also pointed out that Cynthia wanted a word with him. The Marquis just replied coldly that he wasn't interested in noisy women. Luna was surprised, as Cynthia could usually charm every man. Only Mr. Knox could resist her charms. The man brought her back to reality, reminding her of the terms of their deal. The girl placed her hand firmly on her chest and said she would tell him everything. Meanwhile, the knights continued to guard the noisy palace. They couldn't understand what all the commotion and noise was about. The order was to tighten security at the palace, but no one had shown up. Unbeknownst to the guards, a dangerous criminal was behind it all. He wanted to take down the monster who had destroyed his country and his father. The unknown man smiled wickedly, wanting to take revenge with his own hands. Meanwhile, Luna wanted to leave so she could be alone with him. Knox suggested they talk after they got back and asked if she would run away. The girl smiled and said he had become her home too. She immediately began to wonder which other family members were at the reception. The Crown Prince approached them, praising their performance. He added that it was just as he expected from his best friend. The prince smiled, saying that Lunatia had fallen in love with him all over again while watching their duel. She met his expectant gaze and replied awkwardly that you could say that. The girl didn't know how to answer the question and became flustered. The prince decided to break the tension and asked to speak with Knox privately. He explained that he wanted to discuss the search for the Moonlight Grove in more detail. Knox was annoyed at having to discuss work at a party. He apologized, saying that Jindal wouldn't let him off the hook easily. Lunatia smiled and said she would be fine on her own. Knox didn't believe her "don't worry" act for a second. In the end, the prince dragged him away, but not before complimenting his wife before leaving. Lunatia was thrilled because she could finally get something to eat. Ever since losing her sense of taste, her appetite had plummeted, and she had to lie about it. She told Sierra she was just trying to lose weight, which only made Sierra freak out even more. So she decided to at least get a few bites of food. Just as she reached the food table, Soleil pounced on her. He immediately started interrogating her about how she was doing and if everything was all right. The girl replied that it was and hoped he was doing well too. Even though he was her twin, their personalities were worlds apart. He pleaded with her, saying the whole family was waiting for her to come home. He told her to tell him if that perverted Marquis was holding her captive in his mansion. She tried to explain about Knox, but they quickly interrupted her. Nicholas greeted her with the most hypocritical joy, calling her his precious little baby. The girl was immediately disgusted by his affected manner. He told her not to forget the family that was waiting for her to come home. He tried to put on the act of a loving and caring father, but all that could be seen in his eyes was his desire for her to screw over her fiancé and return home. Lunatia was done taking orders from her family, and she was ready to end it all for good. The girl told him coldly that she no longer wanted to be a burden to the Hassel family. Caught off guard, Nicholas's face burned with anger. She continued, saying that she would soon become part of the Iltern family. She stated, as cold as ice, that any connection to the Hassel surname was over. Nicholas gritted his teeth as she said her family would no longer help the Hassel family. She said that after the wedding, her fiancé wouldn't offer them any aid either. Basically, she let him know they had seen through the little games he was playing with the nobles. It seemed that everyone around was starting to see through Nicholas's nonsense. The man turned away in a panic, suddenly feeling utterly humiliated. Luna also demanded that he hand over the agreement he made with Knox. The man snapped at his daughter, saying he used the Marquis' title to protect their family. He tried to accuse her of being ungrateful, but she just repeated what she had said. Lunatia completely crushed his hopes, telling him they were no longer family. She turned to leave, adding that shouting would be considered indecorous. Before leaving the hall, she ordered him not to disappoint her again. Afterwards, she went out onto the balcony, feeling a heavy exhaustion. She knew she couldn't just walk away and leave the palace. Lunatia was about to go back inside when she overheard someone talking. She turned quickly and saw Knox's younger brother standing there. He asked to join her for a moment, claiming he felt a bit dizzy. Lunatia knew he was frail and couldn't refuse. To her surprise, he had shown up at the party alone, without his fiancée. She remembered even seeing his mother, Countess Fonda. Lord Sook explained that she just didn't really like Knox. Lunatia smiled knowingly, understanding the girl's fiery temper. Sook grinned, saying he had managed to convince her, and she had promised to come. He recalled how she had complained about having to rush over after work. The young man chuckled, saying she was a real handful, and then decided to come clean. He genuinely supported her relationship with his brother and would have her back. He said he was glad Knox had finally found someone who could accept him for who he was. Sook added that his brother had been through hell and that he hoped he could find happiness again. Seeing the girl's confused expression, he said he would tell her something. The man was about to quietly reveal a long-buried secret of the Iltern family. It turned out that Sook and Knox were half-brothers. Knox's mother was actually his mother's older sister. Their father was nominally engaged to his mother, but was secretly in love with Knox's mom. Their affair thus led to Knox's birth. After Knox was born, their father lost interest in his fiancée. When Sook's mother found out about all this, she flew into a rage. She couldn't stand the fact that her own sister had a child with her husband. The woman's prayers were answered, and her sister died during childbirth. Knox always said they were full brothers, but his stepmother couldn't tolerate him. Before long, everyone forgot about the existence of the eldest son. Sook confessed that it was his mother who had been pushing for him to inherit the family estate. According to the rules, the headship of the Iltern family was supposed to pass to the eldest son, and Sook himself was naturally frail and sickly. The younger brother himself had no objection to his father wanting to pass the title to Knox, but he still felt a responsibility towards his mother, as everyone except his father was under her control. She even made a deal with him that whoever had a child first would get the title. Lunatia immediately remembered what Ruby had said about having a child. Sook added sadly that, on his mother's orders, Knox was sent to the battlefield. He remembered how he had excitedly run out to greet his triumphant brother, but unexpectedly, Knox did not return the same joy. Sook noticed the change in his demeanor and told him he should get some rest. His mother suddenly appeared behind him, ordering him to stay away from Knox. She contemptuously insulted Knox, saying it was a shame he didn't die on the battlefield. Seeing Lunatia's shocked expression, Sook said his mother had always treated Knox that way. This was also why he hoped Knox and Lunatia would have a child soon. This went against their original agreement, making the girl feel a heavy sense of responsibility. As soon as she understood what he meant, her face turned bright red. Sook didn't know they were in a contract marriage and thought they were planning for an heir. This was usually the case after marriage, but their situation was different. Lunatia knew her future was bleak and that she couldn't have children. Sook noticed they had been talking for a long time and asked her to take good care of his brother. He had even seen how much Knox had changed since Lunatia appeared. It seemed the girl herself hadn't seen any significant difference. There was a lot she didn't know, but she wanted to be by Knox's side until the very end. After she finished speaking, Sook smiled and hurried back to the hall. Lunatia looked down at the garden below and happened to spot Cynthia. She couldn't figure out what her younger sister was doing alone in a place like that. The girl looked like she was ambushing someone. Before Sook could leave, he caught Lunatia's surprise. She thanked him for the story and said all she could do was stay by his side. Lord Sook smiled warmly, saying that was more than enough. He earnestly requested that she become a real family to his brother. For his brother's sake, she couldn't really make a promise, but he had already hurried off. Just as he left the balcony, a panicked Soleil ran up to her. He asked if she had seen Cynthia, and then told her how Cynthia had thrown a tantrum. She had burst into tears over a lost earring and made him go find it. He was told to keep an eye on her, but she disappeared the moment he turned his back. It was then that Lunatia realized Cynthia had been watching Knox's duel. The girl was about to say where she had seen her sister, but they were interrupted. Standing before them was none other than Soleil's teacher. The teacher grinned like a madman. The boy was completely stunned to see his instructor from his former academy. The instructor explained that he had fought alongside Ilter in the war, so he had to come. The man maliciously reminded him that Soleil had been absent from the combat exam yesterday. He began to threaten Soleil, saying he would tell his family about his poor attendance. The teacher added that he needed to start learning from Lord Iltern. He dragged Soleil away by the ear, saying he was going to give him a makeup exam. Lunatia quickly excused herself from Lord Sook, saying she was going to look for her sister. Cynthia was a spoiled child, but she still listened to her older sister. Sook didn't want the girl to go alone and offered to accompany her. Lunatia smiled, saying his fiancé might get angry. In the end, she went to find Cynthia anyway. She wandered through the garden for a long time, looking for the annoying child. Due to her poor eyesight, Lunatia began to feel a little anxious. On top of that, she had already lost her sense of taste. It was just awful. Because of this, she knew she could never be the Marquis's wife and pillar of support. The girl lived with a strong premonition that she would die in 6 months. The next moment, she froze in terror when she saw a body lying there. It was a guard who was supposed to be guarding the palace. He was lying face down. The girl rushed over to check the body and quickly found a huge, bloody wound. It wasn't until she saw his lifeless eyes that she fully realized how bad the situation was. The sight terrified her, and she couldn't help but scream. She quickly checked his chest and realized Cynthia might be in danger. Lunatia fell to her knees, not even noticing another person had appeared. It was Knox's smiling younger brother, who had been looking for Lunatia everywhere. He explained how, after she left, he had found Cynthia running off. She had managed to find her earring, but her brother had given her a stern lecture for it. Lunatia was relieved to realize Cynthia was safe. The man grinned again, saying he had decided to follow her to the garden. When he heard, he reassured her that Ruby would only scold him for it. They were chatting so casually and lightly that they didn't even notice the madman. By the time they spotted him, his blade was already at Lunatia's throat. Meanwhile, Knox and Jindal had stepped aside to discuss something serious. He asked Knox if he believed the Moonlight Grove existed. He simply replied that they couldn't be sure until they found it. The prince chuckled, saying the man was as optimistic as ever. He stated grimly that his time was running out and the empire might be on the brink of collapse. Knox asked just how dire the empire's current situation was. He also pointed out that the emperor and empress were absent from the party tonight. Jindal simply replied coldly that they had urgent matters to attend to. Then he calmly took another sip of his tea. The prince put down his cup and asked if Lunatia knew about the search for the Moonlight Grove. Knox explained that she didn't know the real reason. She thought it was all for his bride. The prince praised his decision to keep the truth a secret. Jindal understood that Knox was afraid of everyone finding out about her ability. The prince added that he could have asked her to participate in the search. Knox hesitated, as he didn't want that kind of fate for his wife. The prince chuckled and told him not to be so serious. He called out to Knox, saying he would give him one last piece of advice before leaving. The smile vanished from his face as he called him a shut-in. He explained that after so many battles, he had made countless enemies who could pose a threat to Lunatia. The prince told him very seriously to watch his back. Meanwhile, the girl's own life was hanging by a thread. The menacing man asked if she was the demon's bride. She wasn't going to answer his question and instead asked who he was. He grinned, saying he was a survivor from the Chevelin Kingdom. Lunatia remembered that Kingdom had declared war on them, but was utterly defeated. The man gritted his teeth, saying Knox had taken the life of his soldier father. He had cried and begged to be allowed to go home to his family. Before he died, Knox finished him off without hesitation. Now this man wanted an eye for an eye. The madman started screaming about how he would get his revenge. After the war, people were more eager for revenge than ever, yet they knew nothing about what happened on the battlefield. Lunatia was sure it wasn't that simple, but he wouldn't listen at all. As if possessed, he kept roaring about taking away the thing he cherished most. He pressed the blade tighter, saying it would be his bride's life. Sook immediately demanded that he let the girl go. It seemed threats didn't work on him. Seeing Knox's brother actually pleased him. He said he would go to the afterlife with the girl. He seemed to have lost his mind, saying he had nothing left to lose. The girl couldn't help but remember asking him to end her if she became a burden. She could see the man was determined, but she had her own mission. She wanted to stay by Knox's side until she could no longer feel, see, or hear anything. Therefore, she decided to read his future to stop this from happening. The moment her hand touched the madman, new information flooded her mind. She saw fragments of Sook trying to protect her from harm. He would try to ram into the madman to help Lunatia break free, but doing so was basically a one-way ticket for him. Lunatia realized this guy wanted to get rid of them both. Then, the vision cut off, and she snapped her eyes open. She couldn't just watch as the madman was about to stab Lord Sook. He wouldn't know where the blow would land, but he would protect her until the very end. Lunatia screamed as she realized he was about to be stabbed. She rushed at the madman and pushed him away, buying them a few seconds. Then she grabbed Lord Sook's hand and desperately fled the scene. She started shouting frantically that there was a killer, hoping someone would hear them. Unfortunately, Lord Sook's poor health decided to drag them down at that very moment. After running for so long, he fell to his knees, feeling like he was about to cough up his lungs. When Lunatia saw his face twisted in pain, she panicked even more. She tried to think of a way to get him to breathe again. She found it outrageous that there wasn't a single guard around. They were supposed to rush to the hall entrance, but Sook couldn't run anymore. He was willing to sacrifice himself as long as Lunatia could get away. There was no way she would let that happen. She told him she wouldn't leave him behind. The man said he would hide in the bushes and catch up with her later. Lunatia felt he was probably lying to her, just to get her to escape quickly. She touched his hand and decided to see what would happen if she left. The next second, she saw herself running towards a garden, leaving him all alone. In a flash, the madman pounced on him and raised his knife. The next image she saw was Lord Sook lying in a pool of blood. She could tell she was just as exhausted as he was, but she couldn't leave him here to die. She said she would lure the madman away, so Lord Sook could take the chance to escape. Lunatia added that he had a better chance of finding the entrance in the dark. Lord Sook tried to stop her, but she just charged straight ahead. She told him not to worry, saying she wouldn't let anyone die. The moment she heard that signature rustling sound, she immediately dashed forward. She managed to get the madman to turn his attention to her and spotted him. Lunatia ran with all her might, wondering if Lord Sook had managed to reach the garden. She could feel her body getting heavier with every second she ran. She reached her limit when she tripped over a rock. She fell hard to the ground, feeling pain all over her body. She hesitated for a moment, and that's when the bloodthirsty madman closed in on her. He was practically drooling, saying she was quite feisty for a lady. The man revealed a twisted smile, saying she would be his first offering. His face contorted with rage as he swore to make that demon pay. The girl froze, waiting for the end to come. Just then, Lord Knox suddenly appeared in front of her. He blocked the attack, saying he could take him down even with a practice sword. As soon as the words left his mouth, he knocked the knife out of the madman's hand. He took advantage of the man's daze to throw him to the ground. He didn't even need a blade to subdue the madman. His normal punch was so powerful that the man collapsed in pain. He ended the fight by pinning the madman to the ground with his boot. He raised his sword and asked if he knew whose woman he was trying to touch. Knox added that he should be glad his sword was made of wood. As Knox held the blade to his head, the madman started screaming that he was about to meet his maker. The next second, Knox left him and rushed to Lunatia's side to check on her. He caressed her cheek, apologizing for being late. His face was full of concern as he asked if she was hurt. The girl said everything was fine and then asked how he found her. It turned out that Soleil had been terrified because he couldn't find her anywhere. Knox had a bad feeling, so he went to the garden and ran right into Sook. Just then, Sook himself ran over with his fiancée. Lunatia immediately recognized the girl's familiar face. It turned out that she was supposed to have seen Lord Sook die in her vision. To her surprise, Ruby thanked her for helping Lord Sook escape. The young man agreed, saying that because of it, he was able to meet up with Ruby and Knox. After that, he gushed about how brave Lunatia was. The girl looked down in embarrassment, trying to say she hadn't done anything special. Even the arrogant Ruby made a point to thank her personally. It was clearly awkward for her to say those words, but she had to do it. On top of that, she even apologized for her rudeness. Lunatia was so shocked to hear this that she was completely stunned. Knox explained that Ruby was worried about her and wanted to cheer her up. Ruby told him to shut up and then called him a real jerk. Lunatia smiled, realizing she had saved a life and received Knox's help. She felt a wave of gratitude, but a sharp pain shot through her body. Every time she used her ability, it came at a severe cost. Her head throbbed violently, making her wail like a mad woman. The pain was so intense, she felt like she could collapse at any moment. Lunatia clutched her head, feeling as if someone was trying to rip her ears off. A few days later, she finally woke up in her own bed. She frantically tried to recall what had happened. She remembered they had arrived at the ball, and then Knox dueled with Rondell. Lunatia tried to piece together the missing memories. Step by step, she finally recalled the moment she was attacked. She immediately latched onto that important event in her mind. The girl remembered that Lord Knox had protected her but couldn't recall any other details. She was trying to figure out what happened next, but Sierra interrupted her. Lunatia turned her head to greet the maid. Sierra was so happy to see the girl awake that she was about to cry. She suddenly realized she couldn't hear a single word the maid was saying. As soon as the maid realized this, she immediately rushed to Lord Knox. Watching this unfold, Lunatia finally understood everything. She touched her ears and realized she had gone deaf. This was because she had foretold the future twice. She thought she was prepared for something like this, but the reality of it hit much harder. For a moment, she felt cut off from everything. A few minutes later, Lord Knox burst into the room. He immediately realized the girl wasn't reacting to him. The man gently squeezed her shoulder to let her know he was there. She turned to greet her husband as if nothing had happened. Knox couldn't understand how she could smile so calmly. Without a word, he just held her tightly. Lunatia tried to figure out what he was doing, but he remained silent. He thanked God out loud, grateful that she had finally woken up. When the girl realized she could hear Knox's voice, she was completely stunned. He told her that 2 weeks had passed since she collapsed in the garden. Still in his arms, she asked if she had really been asleep for that long. He said painfully that he had been worried she would never wake up again. For a moment, he thought she had left him forever. He said that even after seeing so much death, he couldn't accept her passing. He had never been good at expressing his feelings, but at this moment, he could no longer hold back. He held her even tighter, confessing that he didn't want to lose her. Lunatia became more flustered, saying she was really happy right now. She stroked his back, saying she was glad to hear him say that. He gazed into her eyes, as if searching for something. Knox mentioned that she had first lost sight in one eye, and then her hearing began to fail. The girl asked fearfully how he could have guessed. He said that when he rushed into the room, she didn't even turn around. He was about to list all her symptoms, but she interrupted him. She asked him not to make any more guesses. Lunatia smiled and reminded him that she had promised to tell him everything herself. Knox agreed and suggested they talk over tea. Lunatia didn't understand why they were sitting so close. He leaned into her ear and said it was the only way to make sure she could hear him. The whole thing was so strange that even Urine left the room with a knowing smirk. Knox decided to get to the real topic of their meeting. He had figured it out himself, that all these changes were the price she paid for her power. So she decided to tell him about the cruel future she was about to face. Knox sadly realized that this was the real reason she had asked him to end her life. The girl lowered her head, confirming his guess was entirely correct. Knox asked if her family really couldn't see what she was going through. He immediately realized it was a stupid question and apologized. With a hint of sadness in his voice, he said they were just using her. The girl explained that she just wanted them to love her. These words moved Knox, and he just held his wife tighter. She told him she only had 6 months left to live. Even so, she felt a sense of relief to finally be able to open up to someone. She had no idea how Knox would react. The girl waited for him to say something, anything, but he just pushed her back a little. Then he stood up very slowly and carefully, looking at his wife. He rushed to the exit, telling her to wait a moment. He ordered Urine to come out, saying he knew he was eavesdropping. Urine peeked out from behind the door, saying guiltily that he was just passing by. Knox said he didn't care and ordered him to fetch an item from the expedition team's belongings. As soon as Urin left, he turned back to Lunatia. He told her it was now his turn to reveal his secret. Knox decided to share the information he had managed to dig up about the moonlight grass. He had her sit back on his lap, preparing to tell her something. He gently stroked her hair and decided to change the subject. While she was unconscious, they managed to interrogate some witnesses about the madman. Because she was unwell, they put the case on hold and kept the psycho locked up. Lunatia felt guilty, thinking she had slowed down the investigation. She tried to apologize, but Knox thought he was the one who should be sorry. It was because of his status and influence that she had been put in danger. To his surprise, Lunatia cheered up and told him not to say that. She smiled and reminded him that they were a family and it wasn't his fault. He just responded in a low voice that he didn't want to lose her because of his mistake. It was like a cry from the heart, which he intentionally didn't want Luna to hear. So the royal family took responsibility for imprisoning the criminal. They had failed in their duty and let him in, which was why Jindal had even sent a letter during the interrogation. It turned out someone had helped him break into the palace. Luna immediately asked if he had an accomplice. Knox said this accomplice knew about the engagement party. It was obvious they were just being used to get rid of the queen. In her homeland, she was known as the Sacred Guardian, Michaela von Lazanis. Thanks to her military strategies, they had won the last war. Although the emperor had a harem of 3,000, only she had borne him an heir. Many nobles were unhappy with her influence throughout the empire. Jindal was actually the first to propose that theory after the banquet. Jindal said someone was spotted near his mother's bedroom. The guards reported seeing someone lurking near the queen's chambers when she wasn't expecting any visitors. The theory was that he slipped away during the commotion in the garden. During the interrogation, the accomplice knew the queen was unwell and knew a royal secret. Only someone close to the royal family would know. Knox speculated that this person might even be from high society, someone with close ties to the royal family. Jindal asked him to personally lead the investigation to find the Moonblade. That mission was a heavy burden on Knox, but he couldn't back down. When Lunatia found out Her Majesty the Queen was ill, she was stunned. Knox told her they were keeping the news of her serious illness a closely guarded secret. The illness is incurable, and all the royal family can do is keep her alive. So the assassin knew the queen would be unable to fight back. They chose to strike when she was at her weakest. If the attack had succeeded, they could have easily covered it up as a death from illness. The emperor's concubines were likely involved as well. Knox explained that this was why he was sent to find the Moonlight Woodland. He had previously said he needed it to find the most beautiful gem. He revealed that there were no gems there, but there were petals with healing powers. According to the literature, a tea made from the petals could cure any disease. It turned out the legend about the gem was just a cheap hoax. The gem manuscript told a story about a flower that could bring the dead back to life. Lunatia repeated the reason he was sent to find the moonlight grassland. Knox agreed, saying that the flower was the queen's only hope for recovery. It could not only cure diseases, but also restore lost sight and hearing. The girl froze in surprise, trying to understand the meaning behind his words. Knox whispered quietly that he wanted to save her from her impending doom. He declared confidently that he would find the flower and restore her lost senses. Lunatia looked at him in amazement as he spoke of what was to come. He couldn't guarantee the flower would cure her, but he was willing to take the chance. He wanted to give her the bright future she deserved. Lunatia couldn't believe this man was willing to do such a thing for her. She wanted to say something, but closed her mouth guiltily and lowered her head. The girl was still grateful for his care and kindness. She looked up and said she wanted to help him find the Moonlight Woodland. Knox agreed, but asked her to take it easy when using her powers. The girl smiled and asked him to promise her one thing in return. She asked him if they failed to end her. Lunatia said it so casually that his heart sank. Nevertheless, after she had been asking for so long, he couldn't refuse her. Urin returned and showed them what he had been ordered to bring. Knox examined the stone tablet, telling Lunatia he had mentioned it before. This stele told the story of the Moonlight Woodland. The girl immediately began to study the stele closely. It said that the truth would be seen by the one who looks up at the moon. Knox was surprised that the memoirs of Lunatia's ancestors were written in the same script. Urin was thrilled, as they had previously spent weeks deciphering just a few lines. When the girl realized she could help them, she was overjoyed. For her, being able to help Knox without using her powers felt like a godsend. Urin was about to say something, but suddenly burst out laughing. He whispered that they were becoming more and more like an old married couple. Urin revealed that Knox had been personally taking care of her for the past few weeks. Lunatia could hardly believe she was so important to Knox. When Knox started asking what he was whispering about, Urin left in a hurry. Lunatia wondered if she could ever become her husband's true wife. A week later, the girl was still hard at work on the translation. She had managed to decipher most of the steel quickly. She worked so hard that even Sierra could barely pull her away. Lunatia showed a smile on her face, indicating she hadn't heard anything. Sierra gasped and then let out a scream. The next moment, Sierra said she understood how she felt and was happy that Knox might find a cure. Just as with the Queen, Knox had only told the servants a partial truth about Lunatia. The maid mentioned again that someone was waiting for her and suggested she change her clothes. Lunatia still didn't understand why, but she couldn't refuse. A moment later, she found Duke Sook and his fiancée had come to see her. The girl hurriedly apologized for keeping them waiting. She admitted she hadn't even expected them to visit her. The Duke smiled happily and decided to ask how she was feeling. Ruby said she didn't want to come to this backwater, but she was here on important business. Lunatia could barely hear the couple, but she got the gist of what they were saying. She decided to get straight to the point and talk about the real reason they were here. Knox suddenly appeared behind her and said Ruby had something for her. She waved a hand toward a box, saying her mother had taken care of Knox's request. Knox reached for the box, saying it was something he had specially ordered for her. It turned out he had arranged for this to be custom-made, just for her. When Lunatia took the box in her hands, she was completely stunned. She gazed thoughtfully at the strange object, trying to figure out what it was. Knox explained it was a hearing aid to help her hear more clearly. Ruby immediately yelled at them not to be all lovey-dovey in front of guests. It turned out they had reached a peace treaty with an overseas kingdom. In exchange for peace, they promised to help each other. A technology exchange was also included. This device allowed the hearing impaired to keep up with others. Lunatia kept staring at the strange device. It was made by Duchess Fand, who was well-connected. Knox had written her a personal letter, a request she couldn't refuse. Ruby said playfully to consider it her thanks for saving the Duke. It seemed Lunatia was still lost in surprise. Duke Sook tried to explain gently that this was Ruby's way of showing gratitude. Knox just sighed, not bothering to deal with the situation. Lunatia couldn't stop smiling, thanking them for the wonderful gift. Later that evening, the girl found herself alone in her room. She was happy that she had been able to get a little closer to Ruby. It now seemed those two were made for each other. Their personalities a perfect match. Lunatia, for her part, tried to finish deciphering the code. She suddenly remembered the letter she had received earlier. Soleil had decided to contact her after that little incident at the banquet. Her whole family knew she had fainted, but Soleil seemed to be the only one genuinely worried about her. She smiled, thinking it was nice to at least keep in touch with him. The girl suddenly froze, hearing a clear knock on the door. Knox came in, noticing she could now hear even the faintest sounds. Lunatia smiled, saying she could hear everything now, as if she had never lost her hearing. He sat down and said that Ruby didn't know the real reason she needed the device. He added that if she truly lost her hearing, he wouldn't be able to help. He lowered his head and said he could only grant her wishes. The girl blushed, realizing he still remembered the diary. The man agreed, saying he had already granted one of her wishes. He asked her to tell him if there was anything else that she desired. At first, she was surprised, but then a brilliant smile bloomed on her face. She said sincerely that she would be grateful if he could spend these times with her. She looked so lovely in that moment. The Marquis's heart skipped a beat. Although he tried to act as if nothing was wrong, she caught the shift in his emotions. He said, "It's nothing," but his expression completely gave him away. Knox interjected that they had to visit someone first. It turned out the Queen wanted to see her outside the palace walls. She was stunned when she heard the Queen wanted to apologize to her in person. Meanwhile, Lunatia's father was still drinking and had become a complete alcoholic. After finishing another bottle, Nicholas was acting less like a human and more like a beast. His wife tried to tell him it was suicide, but he didn't care. Ever since his lies were exposed, even loyal clients had abandoned abandon the family. Things had gotten so bad that even Rosalind had abandoned them for no reason. His ranting was interrupted by a maid, who announced that a client had arrived. The drunken Nicholas didn't even recognize who it was at first. The maid tried to announce his identity, but was cut off. The man hid his face behind a top hat and apologized for the sudden visit. Nicholas jumped up, unable to believe someone of such status was in his home. The man waved his hand, saying his client would pay him handsomely for a deal. Nicholas froze when he added that the job was top secret. He smiled slyly and said it concerned the Emperor's own family. Meanwhile, Jindal was visiting his ailing mother again. No one had yet found a cure for her kind of illness. He wanted to help her, but she refused and reminded him that the Ilterns would be arriving today. Jindal agreed, saying it was an honor for them to meet her. The woman asked him to call a servant to help her change. He tried to explain that she shouldn't push herself in her condition. The woman smiled at her considerate son and said, "She'll be fine." She added that she had to live for her beloved kingdom and her son. On the way to see the queen, Lunatia asked him if he had met her before. Knox described her as a kind-hearted, sharp-minded, and wise woman. Lunatia asked him to tell her how he became friends with Jindal. He told her they first met when he was studying at the Knights Academy. The best students were summoned to train at the palace, and he went there with Urin. Including him and Urin, there were over 30 students present. It was then that Knox encountered a spy who was planning to attack the royal son. Knox managed to subdue him, and that's how he caught Jindal's attention. The boy said that the spy had been acting suspiciously from start. When Jindal heard this, he just smiled and called him amazing. He looked at the prince nervously as he said he would be the next head of Iltern. Afterwards, the prince smiled and said he liked him. He held out his hand, calling Knox just an ordinary man who didn't chase after fame. Meanwhile, Knox became friends with Urin, and they were sent to the battlefield together. He was the fourth son of a general in the Imperial Army, so he had absolutely no chance of becoming the next heir. Lunatia was surprised they had known each other for so long. Jindal's mother embodied all of her son's good qualities. Knowing her time was short, Lunatia stepped out of the carriage. She looked around, admiring the incredible beauty of her surroundings. Afterwards, Knox took her hand and led her to the meeting place. The queen's residence was built in such a beautiful place. According to Knox, the emperor built it for her so she could relax. Ruining the romance was the fact that an assassin could be lurking among these loyal subjects. Knox suddenly froze and told Lunatia to stop. The girl stopped in surprise and listened to her surroundings. She turned around and was surprised to find two strangers. She recognized the woman as one of the emperor's consorts. Unlike the consort, Lunatia didn't recognize the man with her. He looked Knox up and down and said he didn't expect to run into him here. The man took off his hat as if to show respect, but it felt insincere. He said, "It was unusual to meet a reclusive marquis in this estate." The man asked if they were here to see the queen in person. Lunatia suddenly realized she knew this man. Standing before her was Marquis Latria, a man as influential as Knox. Moreover, the Marquis and His Majesty were old acquaintances, old friends. She also remembered he hadn't attended the engagement party. Knox politely greeted the Marquis and agreed with him. Marquis Latria immediately began to inquire what had brought them here. Knox explained that his fiancée had been attacked at the palace reception. Lunatia was relieved that the incident hadn't gotten out and that no new rumors about Knox were spreading. The Marquis grinned and asked if that was why he hadn't come alone. Lunatia stepped forward and decided to introduce herself to the man at once. She curtsied and gave her name as Lunatia Hassel. Upon hearing the name Hassel, the consort's expression changed. Lunatia noticed her confusion and asked if something was wrong. The woman covered her lips with her fan and apologized. Knox decided to ask what had brought them to the estate as well. It turned out he was here to meet with the emperor to discuss state affairs. The consort mentioned she had mistaken the date of her tea party with the queen. Lunatia was surprised the queen was still performing her duties while unwell. The Marquis hurried away, citing a meeting with His Majesty. The moment he was out of sight, the smile vanished from his face. Knox and Lunatia bowed to Lady Rebian before leaving. The woman gave them a good look, then waved her fan and ordered them to stop. She turned to Lunatia and said she had caught her attention. Rebian invited her to a tea party. As her guest, Lunatia immediately sensed something fishy about her intentions. Nevertheless, she couldn't refuse the emperor's favorite consort. She curtsied politely and said she would be delighted to attend. Lady Rebian returned the smile and said farewell for now. Knox watched her leave and said he knew how hard it was to refuse. Even so, he said bluntly that if he were Lunatia, he would have rejected that invitation. Rebian was the most favored of the three consorts and was notorious for being difficult. Knox speculated that it was she who had sent those assassins to the palace. Lunatia froze, realizing what kind of trouble she had gotten herself into. Knox added that even with Leotra's support, Jindal still didn't trust him. The girl had never imagined court life would be so tense. She remembered hearing her name mentioned before. Back at the Hassel estate, Lunatia tried to recall, but couldn't remember. A guard greeted them on the path, informing them that someone was waiting. As the doors slowly opened, the couple looked ahead confidently. The girl's eyes immediately began to eagerly scan the room's interior. Contrary to all her expectations, a beautiful woman was sitting there. Michaela smiled and greeted Lunatia as if she were a fortune-telling lady. That remark hit Lunatia like a bolt from the blue, as she wanted nothing to do with that. Seeing the shock on Lunatia's face, the queen hurried to say she was just joking. The girl froze, completely unsure how to respond. The queen said Jindal had told her about the legend of the Hassel family. Lunatia racked her brain, trying to recall if the prince had mentioned anything. Knox quickly changed the subject and greeted her respectfully. Michaela told him to dispense with the formalities, as she couldn't stand them. Lunatica was once again struck by how much Jindal resembled his mother. Impressed by Marcella's kind nature, a smile spread across her face. The Empress stood up, deciding to apologize in person. She gave the newlyweds a sweet smile and invited them to sit by her side. Afterwards, they sat down for tea in a peaceful atmosphere. Michaela apologized for their guard's failure to prevent such an attack. She added that it was entirely the royal family's fault and that they were deeply sorry. Lunatia told her not to apologize, saying that no guests were harmed aside from the royal guard. Of course, the guards had borne the brunt of the attack. Michaela promised to do everything in her power to ensure such a tragedy would not happen again. Then, she surprisingly said that tracking down the traitor was proving to be a very tricky matter. Basically, she was implying that she was the real target of the assassination attempt. Lunatia was shocked by Michaela's confidence. She also thanked Knox for his efforts and praised his wife. Knox calmly replied that he was happy to hear his wife being praised. Lunatia blushed from being praised so openly. Michaela smiled, saying she was just stating facts and that no thanks were necessary. She sincerely expressed how happy she was to see them today. Michaela added that her physical condition rarely allowed her to host such events. She smiled, saying she hoped to have tea with him again in the future. When only she and Knox were left, Lunatia shared her thoughts. She immediately noticed the obvious resemblance between the Empress and her son. Knox simply replied calmly that like mother, like son, Lunatia wanted to go home, back to her usual life. To her surprise, Knox declared that it was too early for them to go back now. He remembered seeing in her diary that she wished to take a walk in a beautiful place. Not knowing how to grant this wish, Knox decided to ask for Urian's advice, and he also needed to hear Jindal's opinion. To figure things out, he ultimately decided to put everything on hold and make that walk happen. Knox held out his hand, saying the place wasn't far. Meanwhile, the Emperor's concubine was pensively analyzing the meeting. She straightened her legs when she was told a guest had arrived. As soon as Rebian heard that Rosalind had arrived, she let her in. Immediately after, the girl burst into her room and then froze. She said she had brought the most exquisite jewels. Rebian expressed her doubt in a bored tone, suggesting the trinkets were not worth her time. She added that Rosalind's ambition was extraordinary. She smiled, saying that was the only reason she bought things from her. Rosalind grinned, calling her her most esteemed customer. She said that before showing the jewels, she wanted to hear that story. Rebian found it amusing that the girl actually believed the story of the Moonlight Meadow. Rosalind was surprised at how the woman had suddenly become interested in the meadow. Rebian only said that she was inspired by her persistence and repeated the story about the precious gem. Rosalind stated again that if the meadow could be found, she would create the greatest masterpiece ever for her. Rebian grinned, considering Rosalind's offer. She blurted out for the girl to make her a tiara. It sounded so audacious that Rosalind's eyes widened. Everyone knew that in their kingdom, only the Empress could wear a tiara. Rebian was ambitious and wanted to seize the Empress's position. That same day, she went to the Empress for tea, but made an unexpected discovery. Having not seen her for a month, the Empress greeted her as usual. Even so, Rebian noticed how much she had changed. After they said their goodbyes, she happened to bump into Marquis Lottery. Their conversation only confirmed that Michaela was slowly weakening. Rebian couldn't wait for the woman to drop dead. She hoped for it, so that she could be the next in line for the throne. That was why she wanted a tiara made for herself. They also talked about Marquis Elton living in the woods near the glade. Rosalind was convinced that no one could stop her from searching the forest. Rebian greatly admired her fearlessness and audacity. When the concubine said she had seen her sister, Rosalind froze. It turned out the girl immediately thought of Cynthia. Rebian clarified that the girl looked to be about her age. When Rosalind realized it was Lunatia, she bit her lip in anger. Rebian said she had invited Lunatia to the tea party as a guest of honor. Rosalind pretended not to care, but she was burning with jealousy inside. Rebian smiled smugly, pointing out that she and her sister were not on good terms. She slyly asked if she wanted to put her sister in her place. Rosalind couldn't pass up the kind of opportunity Rebian could offer. The concubine was skillfully playing her, using her to get what she wanted. Meanwhile, Lunatia was taking a walk with Iltern. It seemed he had decided to take her to see the enchanting sea of flowers, and they had convinced Knox to come out for a walk during the day. Knox asked her if this was her first time walking like this. She told him that they almost took her when she was a child, but she got sick. Her entire family decided to leave her behind and go have fun on their own, leaving her all alone at home. Only Soleil thought of her and brought back some flowers for her from the walk. She felt a sting hearing her family talk about the moments she couldn't be a part of. Knox comforted her, saying he didn't have any warm memories of family either. He smiled and suggested bringing the others here next time. Lunatia was very excited by his proposal and agreed. The fragrance of the dancing petals was refreshing, and the sight before her was breathtakingly beautiful. She wanted to remember this moment forever, this time with Knox. Having experienced such beauty, she felt she could even die without regrets. They left the glade, and then she asked where they were going. The man pointed ahead, saying their next destination was over there. The girl was very surprised when it dawned on her where exactly he was taking her. Meanwhile, Sierra was hoping the newlyweds were having a good time. Urine smiled, noticing how infatuated Sierra was with Lunatia. The girl admired how Lunatia could smile every day. Despite her illness, she could understand that, as a middle child in a large family, even she knew that the younger children always got away with things easily, while the older ones had to bear all the responsibilities. Nevertheless, the Lunardi family's problems were different from Sierra's troubles. They were the very reason for the young lady's terminal illness. The girl was surprised when she noticed a strange commotion on the street. It turned out to be the soldiers returning from an expedition, and her beloved was among them. He decided to go see if they had succeeded in finding the moongrass. Sierra decided to go with him so she could see her Roberto. They had no idea what was coming until they saw something that completely upended their perception of reality. Meanwhile, Lunatia was on the next leg of their short walk. Knox brought her to a long-abandoned church. Janelle had mentioned her to him, suggesting they should spend some quality time alone. That was why Knox decided to take her to a place that meant a great deal to him. He said pensively that this was the only place that held special meaning for him. The man asked if she wanted to go inside and reached for the door handle. Then, they both glanced warily as the door was pushed open. Lunatia stepped forward, examining the interior closely. Looking at it, you would never guess the church was abandoned. Knox explained that it was once used for secret weddings. It was right here that his father had proposed to his biological mother. Lunatia was surprised that he spoke of it so easily. It turned out Knox had guessed his younger brother might have already spilled the secret. She admitted it and apologized for finding out his secret. He just said it was fine, as he had intended to tell her anyway. He no longer wanted to hide the fact that his mother had died during childbirth. His father and mother had been in a secret relationship. After a pause, he said he didn't entirely approve of what his parents did. Such things happened among nobles, but he felt sorry for his brother's mother. Lunatia looked at her husband, surprised by the calmness of his conversation. He understood that their love transcended common sense. Thinking of them, he decided he wanted to share the whole story with her. Lunatia's heart skipped a beat, realizing he was willing to entrust this matter to her. The girl smiled gently and agreed with Knox's point. He asked if she wasn't going to judge them for it. Lunatia thought there was no need, as they were following their hearts. The man smiled, thinking he had always dreamed of hearing those words. After a short pause, he gazed into her eyes and thanked her for it. Knox smiled gently, saying he was glad he could bring her here. In the end, they stayed in the church until dawn. It was too late to return to the mansion, so she suggested staying at an inn. Just then, he noticed a moon raven flying toward them. The girl immediately began to panic, worried that something might be wrong. Knox scanned the report in an instant, and then his face fell. It turned out Robert's squad had been searching for the moonlight glade, but they had all returned in terrible shape, and the situation was serious. Lunatia was too shocked to speak. The strangest part was that there wasn't a single scratch on the soldiers. Knox apologized, saying they needed to get home as soon as possible to figure things out. Lunatia agreed without hesitation, her thoughts on the people she cared about. In just 1 year, these people had become more important to her than her own family. That was why she prayed all the way home that they would be all right. When the newlyweds returned to the mansion, it was in chaos. Urine apologized for having to interrupt their date. He said he and the guys thought they would be spending the night at an inn. It seemed Urine particularly enjoyed teasing them about their time alone. Knox cut him off, threatening to make him pay for the crude jokes. The guy raised his hands, saying they already had enough trouble to deal with. After a brief exchange, they hurried into the room where the soldiers were being kept. Sierra, standing next to Robert, immediately called out to Lunatia. She apologized for interrupting their date. Lunatia told her not to apologize and to just explain what on earth had happened. Robert barely managed to say that their squad had acted on intelligence from a deciphered stone tablet. Thanks to this intelligence, they discovered a cave never seen before. The other soldiers winced as they recalled the insects' terrible screams. Lunatia carefully asked them to describe the insects. They looked like moths, but were brightly colored with red eyes. They didn't try to attack the soldiers, but let out terrifying screams. The sound was so horrible that they fled the cave in a hurry. Knox crouched beside them and asked if they had reached the deepest part of the cave. He said they couldn't get in because of a nauseating smell coming from a moldy fungus. So the soldiers were basically incapacitated. There were no beasts in the cave, but nature itself seemed to be protecting it from prying eyes. Robert apologized for failing to complete the mission. He also apologized for interrupting their night. Lunatia wanted to support Robert, but Knox beat her to it. He said Robert did the right thing, as their goal was to scout the area. Robert had succeeded in protecting his teammates and keeping them from harm. Arun said that although they couldn't go deep, they had obtained some very valuable intelligence. It was highly likely that the moon grass was hidden in that cave. Lunatia tensed up, thinking about how far they had managed to get. Arun added that they should prepare well for the next operation. As they brainstormed different options, an idea suddenly popped into Lunatia's head. Everyone froze when they saw her raise her hand. With a serious face, she volunteered to enter the cave. Meanwhile, the Emperor's concubine was having the time of her life. She was sipping wine, surrounded by a group of handsome men, when she looked up as a familiar man greeted her. He grinned, saying he never expected to see her in a place like this. She replied that even noble ladies need some time alone. Rebian began talking about how much she missed the tranquility of the palace. She also reminded him that he was the one who brought her to this place. His eyes lit up at the mention of them using this place for secret trysts in the past. The woman calmly set down her glass, saying they had things to discuss. She waved her hand impatiently at the guards, ordering them to leave them alone. After the guards left, she snapped open her fan and asked him to sit. The woman looked at her co-conspirator, waiting for the details. She asked him how the plan to deal with the Empress was progressing. The man smiled smugly, saying everything was going smoothly. He added that he had even found some powerful allies, but didn't reveal who. He believed they needed to get rid of the Empress while she was vulnerable. Rebian replied with annoyance that he made it sound like she could still be saved. She revealed that the woman was sick and her condition was worsening by the day. She was stunned when she heard rumors that the prince was looking for the moonlight petal herb for her. The Marquis was equally shocked when he realized she had already heard about it. The woman claimed it was a crazy coincidence that the meadow had a stone infused with magic. She smiled smugly, mentioning that her jeweler was personally searching for it on her behalf. The Marquis stroked his chin with interest, seeming to enjoy the situation. Street rumors said the prince had commissioned Marquis Iltern to find the meadow. Ribian said that no one told them they couldn't join the search party. The concubine was determined to find the meadow first and claim the stone for herself. Greed burned in the Marquis's eyes as he offered to find the meadow for her himself. He was so full of sweet talk that she couldn't help but laugh. Rebian stared hard at the Marquis, calling it a tempting offer. Meanwhile, Lunatia was trying her best to save the operation. As expected, everyone was horrified by her crazy plan. Knox said no, that she was completely unprepared for that kind of mission. Lunatia explained that her physical condition made her immune to all those things. Her reasoning was sound, but Knox couldn't take the risk. Simple as that. Urine understood why she wanted to help, but it seemed like a very bad idea to everyone. Lunatia froze, realizing she had no way out. Her time was running out, and she wanted to do her part. It seemed Knox was beginning to realize she wouldn't back down. She squeezed his hand, saying she couldn't miss an opportunity like this. She smiled, promising to come back safe and sound, no problem. Urine noticed how quickly Knox's mood had shifted. He finally relented and gave her a brief on the situation. He told her she had 1 hour, after which he would come in after her. After she thanked him, Knox admitted he just couldn't say no to her. He was reminded of her sweet smile and said he would wait right here. The guy's eyes remained fixed on her as he watched her walk away. Lunatia agreed with everything he said and then rushed forward. She immediately focused, lighting the way ahead with her flashlight. She even removed her hearing aid before moving on. To make matters worse, Lunatia's poor eyesight meant she didn't spot the moths right away. She kept telling herself they wouldn't attack her, even though their nasty chirps were the only thing she could hear echoing. And just like that, she passed the first hurdle. She hadn't gone far before she stumbled upon some moldy fungus. She could still smell the horrible, nauseating stench. However, since her sense of smell was also somewhat dull, it was bearable. Even without using her gift, her 5 senses were slowly deteriorating. After a few more steps, she realized she had entered a deeper area. As soon as she looked up, she saw something completely unexpected. As she had expected, there was no moonlight glade in the cave, but there was another inscription. The girl carefully moved a little closer, hoping to find another clue. She put her hand in the water to test how deep it was. Lunatia quickly took off her boots to avoid getting them wet. Immediately after, her bag of supplies was also placed by the water's edge. Now, chest deep in water, she walked toward the inscription on the stone. It said that whoever came here would be told a secret. She was surprised when she read that the secret was related to finding the moonlight glade. Unfortunately, Lunatia couldn't take the inscription with her. She had to memorize everything. She just brushed her hand over it, and with a click, she discovered a box. She examined it very carefully, looking for anything new. Lunatia couldn't figure out how to open it, as she didn't have a key. But a second later, she saw that there were words on it as well. It was addressed to the one who possessed the gift, asking them to take it and not look back. She could only make out bits and pieces, but the last part was clear. Lunatia guessed this was a message left by her ancestors. She hugged the box tightly and memorized the message on the tablet. Meanwhile, Knox and Urine were on pins and needles. They were so worried that the guy was ready to rush in and get his girl right then, regardless of the consequences. Urine had to talk to him for a while before he finally calmed down and shut his mouth. They both held their breath as they looked toward the cave entrance again. Lunatia ran towards them, safe and sound. Knox immediately rushed to her, wanting to know what on earth had happened to her inside. He started taking off his own coat, asking if she was hurt. She wanted to tell him the good news, but he draped the coat over her, saying it could wait. The only thing he cared about now was making sure she got some rest. She tried to say she was fine, but he wouldn't listen at all. Urine smiled, saying it was best not to argue with Knox right now. He added that she could try to calm him down in her own way. Later, Lunatia looked at the man, realizing he had been worried about her the whole time. She tried to pull her hand away to go change, but he wouldn't let go. The girl turned around and said she wanted to stay with him for a little while. She liked the warmth of his palm and the care she felt around him. She wanted to go back to the palace, rest a bit, and then tell them everything she had learned. Finally, after a while, they made it home before dark. As soon as their carriage approached, Sierra rushed out to greet them. Lunatia smiled, saying the journey was quick and easy. Robert bowed politely, saying they were still plagued by nightmares. Knox ordered Sierra to prepare a hot bath and clean clothes for the girl. She hurried to get the letters that had been sent to Lunatia after they left. The maid handed the girl a letter with a strange pattern all over the envelope. Lunatia was surprised that someone would even bother to send her a letter. It turned out the letter had been sent by the concubine late at night. She smiled smugly, thinking she needed to prepare for her guest's arrival. She wanted to do this for her dear friend Rosalind and the Moonlight Glade. The woman smiled wickedly, challenging her to a little game in her mind. Meanwhile, Lunatia was changing after just finishing her bath. The cave had been cold and dirty, and she was chilled to the bone. Urine unexpectedly stopped her in the hallway as he was coming out his office. He suggested going inside so they could talk with Knox. The man calmly asked if she was done with her business. He had her sit next to him, saying he was ready to hear everything she saw in that cave. She picked up a cup and told him about the map that showed the location of the moonlight glade. Lunatia mentioned it was carved on a stone tablet, which she had memorized. Unfortunately, she couldn't take it with her, so she could only commit it to memory. Knox smiled and patted her head, telling her she did a good job. The girl became flustered, feeling she still couldn't get used to his praise. She blushed so hard, she almost forgot what she wanted to say. Lunatia mentioned that besides the map, there was also a message on the stone slate. The moonlit grove only appears during a full moon, which made finding it very troublesome. After calculating the date of the next full moon, they started to examine the box. Urine discovered the box had a lock that opened in a special way, but no one knew how. Lunatia suggested they take a break before continuing their search. She put down her cup, saying that was all the information she could find. Urine smiled, saying they were now one step closer. Knox said they needed to discuss a new problem, an invitation from Rebian. They were shocked it had come so quickly, as the tea party was in just 3 days. Knox's expression darkened, and he said he had a bad feeling. Lunatia said that refusing would severely damage the Iltian family's reputation, their reputation among the nobility. It was an unwritten rule that you couldn't refuse someone of higher social standing. It was basically seen as a slap in the face, an open act of contempt toward the inviter. Lady Rebian knew this rule inside and out. Knox knew this was true, but being alone with Rebian was just too risky. He had even turned down a tea party with the Marquis and Marchioness of Van, for which his mother had scolded him harshly, and this gave Lunatia an idea. She straightforwardly announced that she would attend the tea party. Knox was frustrated that he couldn't even protect her from those nobles. Lunatia just smiled and told him not to say such foolish things, because they were a family. The next day, she headed to the royal palace for the reception. She entered the room and greeted Rebian respectfully. Lunatia was wearing a magnificent dress, so stunningly beautiful that people couldn't look away. You can imagine her surprise when she found Rebian was all alone. She had never thought it might be just the two of them. Rebian wore a sickeningly sweet smile and thanked her for coming. Meanwhile, Soleil decided to sneak into Lunatia's room again. Despite receiving all her letters, he was still worried about his sister. Our father has changed a lot, shutting himself away, afraid of what's to come. Mom is like she's living in the past, not wanting to talk to anyone. Even our cute little sister Cynthia doesn't seem right. She found Soleil again, just to complain and vent. The girl started crying her eyes out again, needing him to tell her she was cute. Soleil told her again that she was as beautiful and charming as ever. He used to hate her self-important attitude, but now something was different. Ever since meeting the Marchioness, she had lost her confidence and become very depressed. Now he had to comfort her 10 times a day, telling her she was pretty and cute. When Solly saw Rosalind walking toward them, he jumped away from his sister. He immediately rushed out of the room to talk to her. He was so happy she was back, especially after all the drama their family had been through. Rosalind apologized sadly, as if he had completely misunderstood. She said she was just back to get something and would be leaving soon. Solly thought she should at least talk to their father and snap him out of it. Rosalind scoffed, saying they shouldn't drag their older sister into this too. She took advantage of Solly's shock and left without another word. Cynthia immediately rushed to Soleil's side, begging him to tell her what he heard from their sister, but he was too shocked to even stand properly. He had always thought they were a happy family, but Lunatia had been right all along. For the first time, Soleil understood the real reason she had run away from them. Meanwhile, Lunatia herself was being cornered by Rebian. She quickly sat down across from her. In faint surprise, Rebian smiled, saying she wanted to talk to her privately. Lunatia had no idea what the real purpose of this tea party was. Although she couldn't smell, she could still sense a heavy fragrance. Rebian confessed that she and her sister were friends. Lunatia finally realized she had heard the name Crown Princess Rosalind before. She added that Rosalind always shared stories about their family with her. Luna said she learned from her sister that she was the second princess of the Alban Kingdom. Rebian agreed, saying she became a crown princess for the sake of her country's security. Her smile changed when she said he wasn't interested in the crown princesses at all. She added that he only loved his wife, and they had merely received the title. After that, she noticed Lunatia hadn't touched her tea. Lunatia had to take a sip to avoid being rude. Rebian kept that fake smile on her face, waiting for her to drink it. After a moment, she said she was a little different from the other crown princesses. She stated bluntly that she wanted to change her situation. Lunatia froze, trying to figure out why she suddenly felt so dizzy. She immediately guessed the tea had been drugged. Her vision started to blur, and hallucinations appeared before her eyes. Rebian stood up, concluding that she was already feeling the effects of the drug. She explained that it was the effect of a white incense invented in her kingdom. Just one sniff of this, the crown princess said while stroking the girl's hair, and people will confess everything. However, she noticed the drug wasn't affecting her as expected. That's why she put those seeds in the tea to enhance the effect. She smiled smugly, thinking that the girl's sense of taste was already gone, so she wouldn't notice the bitterness. Rebian said the names of Master Knox and Lunatia. Lunatia immediately repeated them. She met Lunatia's eyes, waiting for her to spill everything about the moonlit grove. A while later, she woke up with the thought that she had been talking to Knox about the moonlit grove. A memory flashed before her eyes, his face in the mist. She looked up and saw Rebian looking down at her. Caught off guard, the girl nearly jumped off the sofa. The crown princess said she had fainted during the tea party. Thanks to that sentence, Lunatia managed to piece together what had happened. She clutched her head, which felt like it was about to explode. At first, she blamed it on the fatigue that had built up over the past few days. The girl hastily stood up from the sofa and apologized. She bowed and said she should be heading back. Rebian revealed a predatory smile, saying she had a wonderful time with her. She bid the girl farewell, hoping for another chance like this. Jinil happened to see Lunatia from his office window. He didn't know why she would suddenly appear at the royal palace. He immediately realized something was wrong, as the family had never invited her to the palace. Lunatia blamed herself for dozing off during such an important meeting. She tried to recall the details of the conversation, but something distracted her. She turned around and saw Lord Sook and Ruby, who was following beside him. The girl said she came to the palace because a crown princess had invited her. She was happy to run into them both after such a tense meeting. Sook explained that he was escorting Ruby to invite His Majesty to a dinner party. When he mentioned a formal dinner, Lunatia was immediately taken aback. Ruby said it was an event her family held every year. All the big shots would gather to discuss everything that had happened in the country over the year. Lunatia remembered her mother had always wanted to go there, but their family was never invited. Sook was glad to have run into her today. He then took a letter out of his pocket and handed it to her. When he said he was giving the invitation to Miss Lunatia, Ruby's face turned bright red. Unlike her brother, Ruby didn't want to see Knox at the grand dinner. Lunatia decided to smooth things over and thanked Ruby for the invitation. Ruby pretended not to be flustered and tried to retort with some witty remarks. Still, you could tell she was trying to be friendly. Lunatia quickly scanned the invitation, checking the date, and what do you know, the dinner was on the night of the full moon. She was bewildered by Miss Ruby's overly enthusiastic invitation. Seeing the girl's confusion, Ruby said she didn't invite them to become best friends. Lunatia just smiled and decided to discuss it with Knox. The girl didn't immediately notice the paper that had fallen on the floor. She quickly picked it up and found it was a list of invitees. Lunatia carefully scanned the list of invited nobles. She was very surprised when she found a familiar name. Lunatia couldn't figure out how her father, who had never been invited, could be on the list. She went to Ruby to find out the real reason they were there. Ruby admitted she didn't know Nicholas was her father. She fell silent when Sook asked who had sponsored the Viscount. After thinking for a moment, Ruby remembered it was the Marquis of Lutria. This small detail made the already shocked Lunatia even more incredulous. She couldn't understand even more why someone like that would have dealings with her father. The girl decided to find out if the imperial family was invited. Lord Sook replied that they had invited the Empress and her son. He added thoughtfully that he was very worried about Her Highness's health. She had looked somewhat sickly when they last met. Ruby scolded him, saying she was worried about him because of his cough. She told the servant to notify her immediately if he ever felt unwell or acted strangely. Lunatia pondered his words about the Empress looking sickly. She realized their lives could be ended at any moment. She also had a bad feeling about her father's sponsor. The girl quickly tied the list back up and returned it to Ruby. She also humbly thanked her for letting her see the list. Lunatia smiled and said her goodbyes, saying she would wait for her invitation. Alone, she continued to reflect on the recent events. She couldn't shake the connection between the Marquis of Lutria and Lady Rebian. Lunatia considered using her ability, but Knox probably wouldn't be happy. It wasn't until the last moment that she realized she was lost in the royal palace. The girl looked around thoughtfully, trying to find her way out of the palace. She overheard the clash of swords and guessed it was the knights' training ground. Lunatia hid behind a pillar and began to watch the knights. She was surprised when she saw Rondell. It seemed he had been practicing his skills diligently since his defeat. He tried every attack he could think of, but was still utterly defeated and fell flat on his back. He challenged her, demanding a rematch. It turned out that being kicked out of the second division was what motivated him. Lunatia then realized the last time she saw him was at the ball. Rondell claimed his family almost disowned him because of it. However, the defeat was indeed a valuable lesson for him. Only then did he realize how insignificant he was and that he had achieved nothing. To her surprise, he admitted that everything he had achieved was thanks to his former fiancée. Lunatia couldn't even imagine him thinking these things. He could no longer shamefully rely on a woman, and he didn't even go near her anymore. Now he hoped to apologize to her one day when he became stronger. Having heard all she needed to, Lunatia hastily left the area. She remembered Rondell as a man who only relied on her power, but now, thanks to Lord Knox's lesson, he was able to change. What happened to him was no longer her concern, but it did change her opinion of him slightly. And so, the girl finally returned home at sunset. Knox was furious that she came back so late. He scolded her, saying he was just about to go to the royal palace. To drag her back, his heart nearly stopped when she said she had fainted at the tea party. She tried to convince him not to call a doctor and to get straight to the point. Knox agreed, but she still needed to greet her guest. Lunatia was caught off guard when she heard she had a visitor. The next second, a man suddenly appeared in the room. Standing there was a smiling Soleil, whom she hadn't seen since the ball. He gave his sister a big hug, saying he just wanted to come and see her. The boy immediately regretted it when Knox grabbed him by the scruff of his neck and dragged him away. He harshly reprimanded him for showing up uninvited and pouncing on his fiancée. Lunatia, expecting this behavior from her brother, told him to let go. The girl crouched down and looked up at her brother. She smiled calmly and suggested they talk in her room. As soon as they were alone, Sally was immediately taken aback by her fiancé's personality. He called the 30 minutes they spent in the same room sheer torture. The girl decided to reveal another side of her beloved Marquis to him. She explained that he was the kindest man she had ever met. Sally was willing to believe it, just because she thought so. He suddenly asked her if she was happier here than at the Hassel estate. Lunatia looked away and said she had found her happiness here. It seemed her answer finally dispelled Sally's doubts. He bowed sincerely, apologizing for using her to gain power. Lunatia never thought she would hear such words. He confessed that after she left, he finally saw his family's true colors. He said he only now understood the living hell she had gone through all those years. Sally lowered his head, saying he understood how she felt. She told him to raise his head and revealed that due to their demands, she had nearly lost her 5 senses. Sally was stunned. He couldn't even imagine the damage was that severe. It seemed to take him a second to understand what she was saying. Lunatia clenched her fists, saying she would tell him the truth right then and there. She basically told him that unless the moonlight flower could help her, she was a dead woman. When Soleil realized it was his fault, he began to tremble like a leaf. He even remembered snatching an old book from her when they were kids. That's why she couldn't read the notes. It was all his fault. He fell to his knees, begging her to forgive him for everything he had done. Soleil cried at her feet, asking if there was anything he could do to help her. Lunatia stood up, saying his remorse was enough for her. She grabbed his shoulders and told him it was now up to him to decide what to do with this information. She was sure those people would never believe such a thing. Sally said they needed to know the price of their happiness. She was surprised when he mentioned her father and Rosalind were acting strangely. She said something big was brewing and asked him to reveal the details. Meanwhile, Sierra was staring at a cup in the kitchen, lost in thought. She was so focused that another maid noticed her mood. It turned out she was debating whether to serve the cake and tea now. On one hand, she wanted to go, but she also knew Knox wanted Sally to leave. She even considered, let's say, adjusting her brother's tea. Sierra shook the container, thinking it was a brilliant idea. You can imagine her surprise when Prince Jindal appeared behind her. He explained that he had just arrived at the Marquis' estate. He said he was on his way to see Knox when he was drawn in by an interesting conversation and some delicious tea. He winked at her playfully, saying that's exactly why he came. Shaking in shock, Sierra offered to take him there. She practically pushed him out of the kitchen and led him to Knox. He announced that he had a crucial mission for the Marquis of Eclipse. It turned out an allied ship would be arriving in 3 days. Sailing south, Knox frowned, looking annoyed, and asked why he needed to go and meet them. Jindal explained that the Marquis of Vandy had already built a bridge of friendship with that country. The grand dinner also included unwrapping gifts. Knox had never attended an event by the Vandy family. The prince explained it was because Lady Ruby just didn't like him. He added that his parents were supposed to go and meet them. Unfortunately, Jindal's mother's condition had worsened yesterday. Luckily, no one knew she was unwell for now. If no one from their side greeted the guests, it would cause unnecessary gossip, so they decided to pick him as a substitute. Jindal explained that some common troublemakers had appeared in the South. They weren't a big deal, but it never hurt to have a professional there. Knox was very troubled by his request, which was one he couldn't refuse. Jindal was surprised his friend agreed so quickly. The prince snapped his fingers, saying he wanted to see him bring a partner. That's why he suggested Knox bring Lunatia. Knox wasn't happy about it, as he knew things could get tricky there. Just then, Lunatia appeared to greet the prince. Jindal smiled and told her to come in. The girl bowed and apologized for being late. Knox immediately started questioning her about how the conversation with her brother went. Before they said goodbye, she asked him to remember one important thing. He asked her to write to him immediately if her father and Rosalind started acting strangely. Sally agreed to her request, then unexpectedly became awkward. After all that, he earnestly asked to still be her twin brother. Lunatic was once again moved by how seriously the boy took the matter. She smiled, saying he was her only family in that hellish place. Before she left, she told him to think twice before doing anything. She gave him a warm smile, calling it advice from his twin sister. Sally clenched his fists with a determined look and promised he would do his best. After that, he turned toward the exit and said goodbye. Before finally leaving, he asked her with a trembling voice not to die. She couldn't promise him that, but realized it was the first time she had truly talked with her family. Knox gently stroked her shoulder and gave a small smile. Jindal interrupted them, jokingly calling them true newlyweds. He said he was glad they were getting along so well and invited her to sit next to him. Knox followed her, sternly telling him not to push his luck. Jindal smiled playfully again and asked Lunatia if she liked the sea. He sounded so casual, it completely caught her off guard. The prince said it felt amazing to sail on a ship on the open sea. It was as if he was trying to hook her first before explaining the real situation. The girl lowered her head in embarrassment, saying she had never seen the sea. After a moment's thought, she said she wanted to see it. Knox was not pleased with the prince trying to trick Lunatia. The prince chuckled, admitting he always went soft in front of his wife. He winked slyly, saying he was really counting on them to take this mission. Knox briefly explained to the girl what their mission entailed. He added that the Vandy family was also involved, so they really couldn't refuse. Urin smiled smugly, saying he couldn't believe Knox was invited too. Before leaving, he said it wouldn't have been possible without Lunatia. Lunatia asked if he was really questioning whether she would go. The girl said she could stay at the mansion if he just asked. The man thought for a moment, then asked if she wanted to see the sea. He remembered promising to show her some beautiful places. The girl immediately realized he was referring to the entries in her diary. She was already grateful for everything she had experienced with him and didn't want to ask for more. He had already done too much for someone who was about to lose her sight. In the end, she smiled and said she would go with him. Urin was overjoyed with her decision and immediately jumped in to support it. He added that everything would be fine even if some trouble arose. After some time, Lunatia finally saw the endless sea. She had never imagined it would be so vast. Knox said they had prepared an imperial warship for anti-piracy measures. Suspecting they wanted to use this opportunity to show their strength to the allied nations, Lunatia asked how long it would be until they could see the rest of the fleet. She admitted that just imagining the vastness of the world left her in awe, and seeing her smile, Knox felt it was worth bringing her here. He proposed that after they found the moonlight flower, they would sail together to the other side of the sea, and Lunatia couldn't help but be reminded of the same request from her twin brother. Hearing all this, she couldn't help but start to long to live, when a sailor suddenly reported that a thick fog was rolling in from the southwest. Knox grew tense, as he knew the allied nations were supposed to be coming from that direction, and Lunatia had always heard that the sea was a place where disaster lurked. She even considered foreseeing the future for Knox, but he interrupted her thoughts, telling her not to lean too far over the railing. The girl didn't want to use her ability, but with the situation growing more urgent, she closed her eyes and prayed in her heart that nothing bad would happen. Another crewman reported that they had spotted a ship from the allied nations, but the strangest thing was that there was no one on board. Knox cautiously said they needed to get closer to check it out. Lunatia tried to warn him of the danger, but they had no other choice. He gently caressed her cheek, telling her to wait for him there while he went to check on the ship. His steady voice was reassuring, but she still felt uneasy. She pleaded with him to at least let her foresee the future before he left, but Knox refused, reminding her that he had asked her to use her gift only in emergencies. He meant for when she needed to protect herself. She wanted to argue, but he showed her his formidable-looking sword. Knox said with a smile that this baby was useful on both land and sea. A few minutes later, he had assembled a team to investigate. Once aboard the Allied ship, they found it was just as he'd said, completely empty. He suggested they split up and search the ship for any clues. As soon as he stepped into the cargo hold, he discovered some kind of beast. It was a tiger, a species that only lives in warm climates. Knox guessed this pet was from the Fond family's party. He knew it was a simple wish, and couldn't help but imagine Lunatia's happy face. The creature immediately jumped at a strange sound. He peeked from between the heavy crates and noticed something. 4 tied-up servants were sitting in the cargo hold, having been abandoned there. He introduced himself as being from the Suna Empire and asked if they were from Eula. The man said they had run into a thick fog and were then attacked by bandits. It wasn't until the last moment that Knox realized it might be a trap. Unfortunately, by the time he figured it out, a thug was already behind him. Meanwhile, Lunatia watched the ship with growing anxiety. She tensed up when a crewman reported that they were being boarded by pirates. The next second, a bloodthirsty bandit's blade pierced his back. Lunatia froze, realizing they were completely surrounded. One of them shouted excitedly that they had taken the ship and had a hostage. They demanded all their gold in exchange for the hostage. They tried to drag Lunatia away, but she began to worry about Knox. On land, Jenna was unaware of the raid. His mother hoped the Allied landing would go smoothly. She was still worried about the Iltean family, but the prince comforted her. Still, the possibility of pirates appearing gave her chills. Jindal smirked, saying she didn't know the half of it about his best brother. There were countless stories about how brave he was on the battlefield. People always compared him to a fierce tiger or a wild wolf. He added that when Knox had someone to protect, he was like a beast. The prince squeezed his mother's hand, telling her to focus on her recovery. He smiled reassuringly, saying he would wait for news from his friends. Meanwhile, Lunatia tried to calm herself, thinking that pirates were nothing compared to her husband. She remembered his confident look as he boarded that ship, which gave her hope, but her heart was still filled with worry. Meanwhile, the pirates, seeing she was a noble lady, were all excited, arguing about the best way to deal with her. One of them fantasized about what he would do to her after taking her back to his place, but he was in for a rude awakening. They began to tremble in fear as they realized their end had come. Before they could react, they all fell to the deck, bleeding from gruesome wounds, all in front of his terrified companion. Knox was furious that these scoundrels dared to covet his Lunatia. The pirate tried to hide behind the hostages, not knowing Knox had already freed them all. The man kept making threats, thinking it would save his pathetic life. Knox just calmly raised his sword, saying his suspicions were confirmed. He let the pirate know that he had already taken care of all of them. Seeing the lifeless bodies of his comrades, the thug felt a chill run down his spine. He looked Knox straight in the eye, calling him an absolute monster. When Lunatia saw he was unharmed, she finally breathed a sigh of relief. She was startled when she spotted a hidden enemy with a gun. The man was preparing to shoot his foe in the back. Lunatia screamed at the top of her lungs, calling out for her precious Knox. Hearing his wife's desperate cry, he immediately turned around. In a split second, he managed to dodge the pirate's shot. Realizing he had missed, the bandit cowered in a corner in fear. To his shock, the waves suddenly began to rock the ship violently. A sudden gust of wind blew the thug right off the deck. He fell into the vast sea, a fate that almost guaranteed he would not die peacefully. It seemed Lunatia suffered the same fate, unable to grab onto anything. The next moment, she plunged straight into the deep blue sea. Watching his wife sink into the water, Knox instantly tensed up, terrified for her. Lunatia felt herself being thrown into a world of nothingness, and she couldn't help but wonder if this was the end for her. She had almost forgotten that she had someone who would fight for her until the very end. He swam towards her, trying to snatch her life back from the raging sea. In the end, he succeeded in saving the girl from a tragic end. As soon as she woke up, she saw a huge tiger, though the animal seemed friendly. She immediately recoiled in fear. The maid apologized, saying she had let the animals out of their cages to check on them. She smiled, saying they were all trained not to attack people. When Lunatia noticed how friendly the animal was, she immediately smiled back. Before she could take a step closer, the tiger gave her a lick. She was so captivated by the animal that she even forgot about Knox. He ran a hand through his wet hair, saying that all the pirates were now their prisoners. Now she could finally relax, happy that everyone was safe. Knox asked if she had used her ability. The girl immediately checked herself and said that nothing had changed. Knox was glad her hearing aid was waterproof. He held out his hand, suggesting she go change into some dry clothes. Lunatia smiled and agreed, as her clothes were completely soaked. A while later, they were finally able to relax in the ship's cabin. Lunatia thoughtfully thanked Knox for saving her from the water. She smiled, saying that Mr. Knox had saved her once again. To her surprise, the man replied that she had saved his life first. He remembered that if she hadn't cried out then, he would have been a dead man. He also said it was only natural for a husband to help his wife. The man said it with such certainty that Lunatia's heart felt warm again. She smiled, saying that in that case, a wife should also help her husband. She fell into thought, saying that experiencing a world of nothingness was terrifying. She knew that the tragic day when everything would be taken from her was drawing closer. Lunatia confessed again that her desire to live with Knox had not changed. She felt like she was drowning again, so she decided to tell him everything. Overcome with emotion, he grabbed Lunatia and held her in a tight embrace. It seemed she hadn't expected this sudden, affectionate hug at all. The words were hard for him to say, but he promised he would definitely find the moonlight flower. In the end, they successfully completed their mission to rendezvous with the Allied nations. Later, Jindal put a bounty on the pirates who had caused trouble. After that, Knox announced that he would no longer accept any requests from him. Even so, Prince Jindal still seemed carefree. After some time, the night of the full moon finally arrived. After making an appearance at the Marquis' banquet, she decided to go search for the moonlight flower. She also wanted to keep an eye on what her father and Rosalind were up to. The girl placed a hand on her heart, wondering if she would be able to find the flowers. She felt like her fate was finally in her own hands. Lunatia nearly jumped when Sierra called her name. The girl turned around absent-mindedly, asking the maid to repeat herself. The maid presented 2 boxes, asking which necklace she preferred. Lunatia said she was fine, but everything felt hazy after that. She pointed to the box in Sierra's hand. The maid agreed with her choice, saying it matched the color of her dress perfectly. She enthusiastically promised to make her look her most gorgeous. Lunatia smiled, realizing she finally had people who cared about her. It was these good people who made her want to keep going. Even if everything depended on tonight, she would believe in the future until the very end. Meanwhile, Mr. Knox was already fully prepared for the banquet. Lunatia thanked him for his patience and noted that their outfits matched. The man paused thoughtfully and looked directly into her eyes. Urine repeated the compliment Knox was supposed to give her. Although Knox wasn't as eloquent, she was still grateful for the sentiment. She agreed with his words, saying that she did indeed look lovely. She added that she didn't want to part ways so soon. Lunatia knew she had to change into lighter clothes before searching for the moonlight meadow. Knox was really trying his best to live in the moment. At this lavish banquet, she was holding his hand while he called the night special. He looked at his wife with a determined glint in his eyes and suggested they get going. Urine waved, saying he would catch up with them later. He told them to go ahead and enjoy the banquet. Afterward, the newlyweds headed towards the carriage, ready to go to the banquet. She froze when the Marquis suddenly commented on her dress. Knox leaned in and whispered in her ear that she looked beautiful in the dress. Then he turned his head as if nothing had happened, almost as if he was afraid of her reaction. Lunatia gave him a genuine smile and thanked him for the compliment. A short while later, they finally arrived at the venue. Lunatia was excited by the grand event and the large number of guests. They also noticed that the royal family security was heavily armed. Seeing the Empress in good health, Lunatia was relieved. She scanned the room, a little worried about who else might be here. Lunatia saw her happy-looking father and her slightly thinner mother, which immediately reminded her of Solly and Cynthia. Back home, what really bothered her was Rosalind's strange behavior. They turned when they heard her younger brother cheerfully calling out to Knox. She bowed respectfully, thanking him for the invitation. He just said that it was Ruby who had invited them, and she would be over soon. The Lord was also glad that Knox could join them. Lunatia noticed the Lord suddenly became flustered, as if he had something to confess. The girl's eyes widened when she heard that the Lord's mother was also here. The next second, the woman was shouting at him. She asked who he was talking to in a harsh tone, as if declaring war.